Gnostic Anthropology. Samael Aun Weor. 3rd edition, Medellin, Colombia, October 1980. First lecture. The Origin of Man. Much research has been conducted on the origin of man, and in reality, only hypotheses have been formulated by the materialistic anthropologists of this decadent and gloomy age. If we were to ask the materialistic anthropologists when and in what exact manner the first man appeared, they certainly would not be able to provide an exact answer. From the times of Mr. Darwin to Haeckel and subsequently from Haeckel to our present days, countless hypotheses and theories about the origin of man have emerged. However, we must emphatically clarify that none of these assumptions can be definitively proven. Even Haeckel himself asserts with great emphasis that neither geology nor the science called phylogeny will ever have exactness within the realm of official science. If Haeckel makes such a claim, what could we possibly add to this matter? In reality, the origin of life and the origin of man cannot be truly known until humanity delves deeply into Gnostic anthropology. What do the materialistic protists tell us? What do they arrogantly affirm? What do they suppose about the origin of life and the human psyche? Let us recall with absolute clarity the famous atomic mantram of Haeckel within the watery abyss. A complex atom that could never arise by chance, as that good man, deep down ignorant, supposes. Although praised by many Englishmen, he did great harm to humanity with his famous theories. We can only say, parodying Job, may his memory be erased from humanity, and may his name not appear on the streets. Do you believe that the atom from the watery abyss, the atomic mantram, could arise by chance? If it takes the intelligence of scientists to build an atomic bomb, how much greater talent would be required to create an atom? If we were to deny intelligent principles to nature, mechanics would cease to exist. Because the existence of mechanics without mechanics is impossible. If someone were to consider the possibility of a machine existing without an author, I would like them to demonstrate it, to place the chemical elements on the laboratory table to create a radio, a car, or even a simple organic cell. I think D. Alfonso Herrera, the author of Plasmogenia, managed to create an artificial cell. However, this was always a lifeless cell that never had life. What do the protists say? They claim that consciousness, being, soul, or spirit, simply psychic principles, are nothing more than molecular evolutions of protoplasm over the centuries. Obviously, the molecular souls of the fanatical protists would never withstand a thorough analysis. The cell soul, the gelatinous bathybius of the famous Haeckel, from which all organic species supposedly arose, is good for a Molière play and its caricatures. At the heart of this whole issue and behind all these mechanistic and evolutionary theories lies the desire to combat the clergy. They always seek a system, a theory that satisfies the mind and heart to demolish the Hebrew Genesis. It is precisely the reaction against the biblical Adam and his famous Eve, created from a rib, that is the living origin of Darwin, Haeckel, and their followers. But they should be sincere, they should express their dissatisfaction with all clerical concepts. It is not right that so many unsupported hypotheses arise simply as a reaction against clericalism. What does Mr. Darwin say about the issue of the anthropoid monkey? That possibly man descended from it. However, he does not assert this as emphatically as the German and English materialists assume. In reality, within his system, Mr. Darwin laid certain foundations that undermine and even annihilate the supposed human origin from monkeys, whether anthropoid or catarrhine. 1. First, as Huxley demonstrated, the human skeleton is completely different in its structure from that of monkeys. I do not doubt that there are certain similarities between the anthropoid and the poor intellectual animal mistakenly called man, but there is no definitive accuracy in this matter. The anthropoid skeleton is adapted for climbing, as indicated by the elasticity and construction of its bone system. In contrast, the human skeleton is designed for walking. These are two different bone structures. 2. Furthermore, the elasticity and cranial axis of the anthropoid and the human being are completely different, which gives us serious food for thought. 3. Moreover, as the materialistic anthropologists themselves have stated with absolute clarity, an organized being could not come from another that developed in the opposite direction, ordered antithetically. Let's take the example of man and the anthropoid. Even though man may be degenerated in these times, he is an organized being. If we study the life and habits of the anthropoid, we can see that it is organized in a different, contrary, antithetical way. An organized being could not, therefore, come from another organized in an opposite manner. This is consistently affirmed by materialist schools. What would be the age of the anthropoid? In what era did the first apes appear on Earth? Unquestionably, in the Miocene. Who could deny it? They must have appeared in the third part of the Miocene, some 15 to 25 million years ago. Why did the anthropoids have to appear on the face of the Earth? Could the gentlemen of materialistic anthropology, those brilliant modern scientists who are so proud of their wisdom, provide an exact answer? Obviously not. Furthermore, the Miocene was not located within the famous Pangaea touted by materialistic geology. It is evident that the Miocene had its own setting in the ancient Lemurian land, a continent previously located in the Pacific Ocean. Remnants of Lemuria can still be found in Oceania, with the Great Australia, Easter Island, where certain monoliths are carved, etc. The fact that materialistic anthropology does not accept this because it is entirely focused on its Pangaea, what does that matter to science and to us? In reality, they will not discover Lemuria with carbon-14, potassium-argon, or pollen tests. All these testing systems of a materialistic nature are good for a Molière play and its caricatures. In these times, after the endless hypotheses of Haeckel, Darwin, Huxley, and all their followers, the theory of natural selection of species is still being enthroned, and it is attributed the power to create new species. In the name of truth, we must say that the idea of natural selection as a creative force is simply a rhetorical game for the ignorant, something that lacks a solid foundation. The notion that natural selection can create new species, that man arose through natural selection, is fundamentally ridiculous and reflects an extreme level of ignorance. I do not deny natural selection, it is obvious that it exists, but it does not have the power to create new species. In reality, all that exists is physiological selection, selection of structures, and the segregation of the fittest. This is all. Taking natural selection to the point of turning it into a universal creative power is the height of absurdity. No true sage would ever entertain such a foolish idea. It has never been observed that a new species arises through natural selection. When? In what era? Structures are indeed selected, we do not deny this. The strongest prevail in the struggle for daily bread, in the ceaseless battle in which one fights to eat and not be eaten. Obviously, the stronger ones succeed and transmit their characteristics to their descendants, physiological and structural characteristics. Thus, the selected, the fittest, segregate and pass on these attributes to their offspring. This is how the law of natural selection should be understood, this is how it should be comprehended. Any species in the deep jungles of nature must fight to eat and not be eaten. Such a struggle is horrific, and naturally, the strongest prevail. The strongest have marvelous structures, important characteristics that are transmitted to their offspring. But this does not imply a change in form, it does not mean the birth of new species. It is clear that no materialistic scientist has ever seen one species emerging from another through the law of natural selection. They have no proof, they have never witnessed it. On what basis do they rely? It is easy to propose a hypothesis and then dogmatically assert that it is the truth and nothing but the truth. However, are they not the materialistic anthropologists who claim to believe only in what they see, who do not accept anything they have not seen? What a terrible contradiction! They believe in their hypotheses, even though they have never seen them. Possible ancestors of man. They claim that humans come from mice. They have no direct evidence for this. They also emphasize the idea that humans come from mandrills. There are countless theories from these foolish scientists, absurd claims of events they have never witnessed. We Gnostic anthropologists do not accept superstitions, these are absurd superstitions. We are rigorous in our investigation and demanding in our expression. We do not like such fantasies, we want actions, concrete and definitive facts. When we delve into this question regarding our possible ancestors, we can clearly see the chaotic state in which materialistic science finds itself, the total disorder of their degenerate minds, and their lack of capacity for investigation. That is the harsh reality of the situation. This notion that certain hominid forms give rise to others just because, based solely on evidence as ridiculous as carbon-14 or potassium argon or pollen, is truly the shame of the 20th century. We Gnostic anthropologists have different methods for research. We have special disciplines that allow us to activate certain latent faculties in the human brain, certain perception senses entirely unknown to materialistic anthropology. It is logical that nature has memory, and one day it will be demonstrated. Modern scientific experiments are already beginning, and soon the sound waves of the past will be broken down into images and will be perceptible through certain screens. There are already scientific attempts in this matter. Then, viewers from around the world will be able to see the origin of man and the history of the earth and its races. When that day comes, which is not far off, the Antichrist of false science will be exposed before the solemn verdict of public consciousness. This matter of natural selection, climate, environment, etc., truly captivates many people, causing them to forget the original types from which the species emerged. The foolish scientists believe that natural selection can occur in an entirely mechanistic manner, without intelligent guiding principles. That would be as absurd as thinking that any machine in the world could operate without an intelligent principle, without an architectural mind, or without an engineer who gave it form. Undoubtedly, these intelligent principles of nature can only be rejected by fools, by those who pretend that any organic machine can arise by chance. These principles will never be rejected by truly wise men in the fullest sense of the word. As we delve deeper into all of this, we see all the flaws of materialistic anthropology. It is necessary to reflect deeply on all of these matters. If, instead of taking an attacking stance against any clericalism, they had gone through a prior reflective analysis, they would never have dared to launch their unscientific hypotheses. We know very well that the Adam and Eve that so troubles the materialistic anthropologists is nothing more than a symbol. Those profane anthropologists who want to refute Genesis should understand, and we should all understand, that Genesis is just an alchemical treatise for alchemists, and it should never be accepted literally. So, the materialistic anthropologists make an effort to refute something they do not even understand. That's why I dare to say that their hypotheses never have solid foundations. Even Mr. Darwin never thought to go so far with his doctrines. Let us remember that he himself speaks of characterizations. After some organic species have gone through a selective process of structures and physiology, they undoubtedly acquire constant and definitive characteristics. So, if the famous anthropoid or monkey underwent selective processes, it subsequently assumed its total characteristics and never underwent any further changes, that is obvious. The issue of the Nopathicoidae, with its famous three sons, the tailless Gynocephalus, the tailless monkey, and the arboreal Paleolithic man, has never been verified precisely or definitively. These are nothing but baseless theories, certainly ridiculously absurd. Those who are so concerned about prosimian mammals, such as the famous lemur, clearly have no idea about what man is in himself and his origin. The famous lemur, which is also considered one of our ancestors, praised by some scientists for its famous discoidal placenta, has nothing to do with human genesis. All of this, in essence, is nothing more than fantasies devoid of any reality. The famous materialist scientists spring into action to study the mechanical evolution of the human species or any other species, halfway along the path, after these have crystallized into a sensible form, as they had undergone terrible evolutionary and involutionary processes within the psychological space, the hypersensible, in the higher dimensions of nature and the cosmos. Of course, when we speak this way, materialist anthropologists become as nervous and annoyed as the Chinese do when they listen to a Western concert. They laugh, probably laughing without realizing that anyone who laughs at what they don't understand is on the path to being an idiot. They seek similarities, yes, they make people believe that the shape of a shark's head and mouth gives rise to other mammals, including the brother mouse. Now, the mouse has become a great lord, as it is nothing less than our ancestor, possibly the predecessor of Haeckel and Darwin, or Huxley, or the famous pharaohs of ancient Egypt, or Einstein, who knows? It is considered a prosimian mammal that has actually risen to a prominent place in conference rooms. How far has human ignorance truly reached? I do not deny that the mouse may have existed in Atlantis. By the way, it was the size of any pig. Don Mario Rosso de Luna, the distinguished Spanish writer, clearly speaks about that. If it existed in Atlantis, I do not deny its existence in Lemuria either. But to consider it, if not the most important, one of the most important ancestors of man is entirely different. Indeed, when one does not know Gnostic anthropology, one falls into the most dreadful absurdities. Then the followers of the Antichrist bow before the mouse, the shark, which is also considered an old ancestor, or the lemur, a very interesting little animal, and so on. But when one truly understands Gnostic anthropology, one does not fall into such ridiculous ideas. By carefully analyzing the principles of materialist anthropology, we discover that their fantasies are precisely due to their complete ignorance of universal Gnosticism. The idea that a facial feature, etc., resembling another serves as a basis for establishing possible descent is fundamentally as empirical as those who believe that man was made from clay, taking it literally without realizing that it is merely symbolic. The original germs of great nature, whether humans or beasts, always develop in the psychological space and within the higher dimensions before crystallizing in physical form. There is no doubt that they are similar in their structures, so they could never serve as a basis or foundation for a theory or even just for a basic concept. The germs differentiate as they crystallize, and this is only normal. The origin of man is something deeper. It evolved from the chaos, in the higher dimensions of nature, until it crystallized into a sensible form in ancient times. Undoubtedly, in future chapters, we will delve deeper into this issue. I want to tell you with complete sincerity that the origin of humanity will be revealed in these lectures, the primary and secondary causes that gave rise to the human species. Do the materialist anthropologists know this, perhaps? Even the followers of Haeckel, the same scientists, know very well that the entire geological past and materialist phylogeny will never become an exact science, as they have affirmed, as they have said. So what? We are in a time of great restlessness, and the mystery of the origin of man must be clarified. The realm of hypotheses is detestable, like a wall without foundations, just give it a slight push to turn it into fine sediment. The most serious aspect of materialist anthropology is denying the intelligent principles of the universal machinery. Obviously, such an attitude leaves the machinery without bases, without foundations. It is not possible for the machine to operate or be constructed at random. The intelligent principles of nature are active, and they manifest themselves wisely in every selective process. It is also absurd to confine ourselves to the dogma of evolutionary mechanics. If there are constructive principles in nature, there are unquestionably destructive ones as well. If there is evolution in living species, there is also involution. There is evolution, for example, in the germ that dies for the shoot to be born, in the plant that grows, produces leaves, and eventually bears fruit. There is involution in the withering and dying plant that ultimately becomes a pile of logs. There is evolution in the creature gestating in the mother's womb, in the child at play, in the youth. There is involution in the elderly person who declines and eventually dies. Worlds evolve when they emerge from chaos into life, and then they involute when they ultimately become new moons. So, if we consider anthropology exclusively through the lens of evolutionary mechanics, we are speaking in a partial manner, falling into error. But if we study anthropology in the light of involution as well, then we proceed with balance because evolution and involution constitute the mechanical axis of all of nature. Therefore, considering evolution as the sole foundation of this great natural mechanism is completely absurd. We have to consider life and death, the times of development, and the times of decay. Only then will we move correctly within the integral Gnostic dialectic. We are by no means willing to be confined to the materialist evolutionary dogma. We also have to study the involutionary processes of anthropology, or we walk the path of error. What are the original types of this human race? We have methods, scientific systems, through which we can see, hear, touch, and feel these original types. We know very well that before the intellectual animal appeared on the earth in Plato's Atlantis, which is not a mere fantasy as the ignorant fanatics of the famous materialist Pangaea claim, there already existed humans. In Lemuria, there were humans, just as in the Hyperborean and Polar eras. But these are points that we will only develop in future lectures for the clarity of all who listen to and read this lecture. Atlantis really existed. It was a continent located in the Atlantic Ocean. Remnants of Atlantis can be found in the Antilles Archipelago, the Canary Islands, and even in Spain, which is a piece of the ancient Atlantis. But the materialist anthropologists do not know this, nor do the geologists who are fundamentally backward, incapable of projecting themselves through time. How could they know anything about what happened so many million years ago, in the Miocene period? What do they know about the Miocene? Have they seen it, touched it, felt it? If we speak of the Miocene, it is because we can see it, and we know that it is accessible to anyone who is capable of developing the transcendental faculties of the human brain. But the materialist denial is inconsistent. They say they believe only in what they see, and yet they believe in all their absurd hypotheses. Hypotheses that no one has seen, that no one can confirm. In truth, no scientist ever saw the first human, yet they speak with as much self-assurance as if they had been in the Miocene, as if they had seen the anthropoids emerging from there in ancient Lemuria. Materialist anthropologists enshrine their marvelous gods, such as the famous lemurs and even the mandrills, as sublime prosimian creatures from which we descend. Do they know this? Have they ever seen it? Never. What are they basing this on? Have they seen it? And are they not the ones who say they believe only in what they see? Then why are they believing in something they have never seen? Is this not a contradiction? Is it not fundamentally inconsistent? Glossary of the first lecture. Charles Robert Darwin, 1809–1882, British biologist. He interpreted evolutionary theories in terms of the theory of natural selection and the struggle for existence. His main work was on the origin of species by means of natural selection, published in 1859. He was preceded by his own grandfather, Erasmus Darwin, 1731–1802, author of Zoonomia, as well as by Lamarck and other less renowned and less important figures. Ernest Henrik Haeckel, 1834–1919, German biologist who adhered to Darwin's theories. Author of Natural Creation and System of Siphonophores, in which he presented his naturalistic or materialistic monism, according to which life originated under favorable conditions in the watery abyss of the ocean with the famous atomic moneron, Bathybius, a gelatinous protozoan animal. Bathybius comes from the Greek bathys equals deep and bias equals life. Protists, these are naturalists, biologists, etc., who adhere to evolutionary theory. They have invented kingdoms, intermediate animal species that supposedly existed in the remote past to fill the gap left by the famous missing links. Such intermediate kingdoms are also called protists and include beings of dubious classification. Atomic moneron, see note on Ernest Henrik Haeckel. Jean-Baptiste Poquelin, called Molière, 1622–1673. French playwright. The greatest exponent of French comedy theatre. He sharply criticized the vices of his time and was able to find the ridiculous aspects of situations and characters. Catarines or catarines, from the Greek kata, downward, rhinos equals nose. A type of monkey with a very narrow nasal septum, so that the openings of the nose point downward. In opposition to platyrines, animals, especially monkeys, with a broad, flat nose. The tailless Catarrhine monkey, e.g., the orangutan and gorilla, is called anthropoid because of its superficial resemblance to the so-called intellectual animal called man. Thomas Henry Huxley, 1825–1895, the father of Leonard Huxley, who is in turn the father of Aldous Huxley. Thomas, as a biologist and writer, aimed to promote popular understanding of science. He shared Darwin's views and authored Oceanic Hydrozoa and a Manual of the Anatomy of Vertebrate Animals. Miocene, the fourth epoch of the Genozoic era, a tertiary period, according to materialist science's classification. It covers a span from about 25 million years ago to 15 or 13 million years ago. Pangea, from the Greek, pan equals all, d equals earth. A theory about the movement of continents, formulated in 1912 by the German geophysicist and meteorologist Alfred Lothar Wegener, 1880–1930. According to this theory, all current continents were once united and have since moved due to alleged continental drift. Carbon-14, potassium-argon, pollen, and other tests, these are the methods used by materialist science to investigate the geological composition of the past, determine the age of archaeological finds, etc. The carbon-14 or radiocarbon test is based on physical-chemical procedures and the fact that living beings assimilate the carbon-14 isotope, storing it in hard parts like bones, teeth, wood, etc. This method can determine ages of up to 50 to 60,000 years at most. The other systems are much less precise and reliable, according to materialist science itself. Quadruped, cynocephalo from West Africa. Cynocephalus, from the Greek kuon, dog, and kephal, head. A large species of monkey in Africa, whose head resembles that of dogs. The Egyptians worshipped cynocephalos. Prosimians, or prosimian mammals, an ancient order of mammals equivalent to today's lemurs, characterized by having an opposable thumb on one of their limbs. SCM would be the missing link between bats and true monkeys. Alto, in the Pequeno-Larousse Illustrata dictionary, it mentions that the term alto was used in antiquity to refer to mice. Herrera Alonso L., Mexican biologist, born in the capital on July 3, 1868. He is known in the scientific world for his work on plasmogony, a new science that deals with the origin of plasma and was created by him. He initiated an ethereal philosophy and defines life as movement in the infinite, reducing everything that exists to the properties of ether, considered the primary chemical element. His plasmogony experiments are documented in 35 volumes of work published from 1892 to 1925. His seminal work is La vie sur les hauts plateaux. He has also written works like Notions de biologie et de plasmogenie, Berlin, 1906, The Mexican Pharmacopoeia, and others. Plasmogeny, according to the etymology of the word, it means the production or formation of protoplasm, the living substance of the cell. However, what modern scientists want to convey with this term is the artificial production not only of protoplasm or living substance but also of cells, tissues, and even entire organisms using only physical-chemical forces. Phylogeny, the supposed development of species from other, more ancient, different species. It is the hypothetical family tree of the species. The term was coined by Haeckel. Second lecture. The question of the origin of man is indeed very debatable, very thorny. Mr. Darwin laid down certain principles in his work that must be remembered even by the materialist anthropologists. Mr. Darwin states that a species evolving positively cannot in any way descend from another species evolving negatively. He also affirms that two similar but different species can be related to a common ancestor, but one cannot come from the other. So as we advance in these discussions of scientific anthropology, we clearly find certain contradictions in materialism. How is it possible to ignore Darwin's principles? How is it possible that even today there are those who think that man comes from monkeys? Undoubtedly, the facts speak for themselves, and the famous missing link has still not been found. Where is it? Much has been said against the existence of the father of Manu, the Dhyan Kohan, but there are actually millions of people in the Eastern and even Western world who accept the Dhyan Kohan. Moreover, such a belief is more logical than the man-monkey that Haeckel would have liked to exist but in reality never went beyond being a mere fantasy of its author. Time goes by, and the famous man-monkey has never been discovered anywhere on Earth. Where is this reasoning, thinking monkey with language accessible to all? Which one is it? Undoubtedly, this type of literary fantasy is fundamentally useless. For example, consider brain size. The volume of a gorilla's brain does not even reach 1/3 of the brain of any Australian savage, who, as we know, incidentally, are the most primitive creatures on our planet. There would be a missing link that connects the most advanced gorilla with the most backward Australian savage. Where is that missing link? What happened to it? Does it even exist? Undoubtedly, in the Lemurian continent, during the Mesozoic era, the first primates emerged. But what would be their origin? Gnosis asserts emphatically that certain Lemurian human groups mixed with some subhuman creatures to give rise to the species of primates. Haeckel, in no way, opposed the concept that primates had their origin in Lemuria. He always accepted the reality of that continent. Let's reflect a bit. Where was Lemuria located? In the Pacific Ocean, that's obvious. It covered a vast area of that sea. Over 10,000 years of earthquakes, it gradually submerged beneath the raging waves of the ocean. However, remnants of Lemuria remained in Oceania, Australia, Easter Island, and so on. Lemuria was a reality, occupying its place in a very ancient time. This may disturb today those materialist anthropologists who are advocates of Pangaea. These gentlemen have become so fixated on their dogmatism about Pangaea that they would never remotely entertain the possibility of Lemuria. The fact that primates were born during the Mesozoic era, precisely during the Miocene, the third part of the Eocene, is not at all unusual. But our assertions don't end there. Other species of monkeys also had their origin in Plato's Atlantis, which is nothing more than a simple myth for the fanatic materialists of Pangaea. However, Atlantis did exist, even though they deny it. It has already been discovered, despite their opposition. Anyone who has studied the ocean floor knows very well that there is still a large plateau between America and Europe. Recently, some scientists who discovered Atlantis tried to explore it from Spain. However, it was during Franco's regime, and they couldn't. Atlantis is not, therefore, what is commonly believed to be a fantastic legend. It was a reality. The world map was completely different in the past, ever-changing. Even the very concept of Pangaea by materialist anthropologists must have undergone tremendous changes. We know very well that continents are floating, as Don Mario Rosso de Luna has clearly explained, and this should not surprise anyone. This is one aspect where the fanatical materialists of Pangaea agree, they do not deny it. However, they still have a long way to go in understanding the causes or reasons for such continental drifts. I believe that if they were to read Don Mario Rosso de Luna, which I consider highly unlikely, they would enhance their knowledge. If we were to think of our Earth as an egg, the continents would be the yolk, supported on the clear part, and between the yolk and the clear part, there are naturally substances, liquids, elements that materialistic science, at present, is unaware of. Some believe that certain types of superior monkeys or changos, as we would call them, like gorillas and chimpanzees, originated from Lemuria. There are also those who claim that the lower classes, such as Caterinos and Platerinos, properly came from Atlantis. We won't object to this, but we do need to reflect deeply. At present, some amusing comments are being made. Materialistic science invents new hypotheses every day. They have established a rather curious, supremely ridiculous chain regarding our possible ancestors. The chain starts with the shark, from which, according to materialist anthropologists, reptiles descended. A ridiculous theory, isn't it? Only conceivable by minds of reptiles, really. They continue with the famous opossum, a creature similar to the crocodile but slightly more evolved, as they emphasize. And from there, following the course of this marvelous chain, they arrive at a tiny animal that has been given great importance these days. I emphatically refer to the lemur or lemur, as they call it. They attribute it a discoidal placenta, which is rejected even by zoologists themselves. Tremendous contradictions are found in these nooks of materialistic science, in materialistic anthropology. The matter continues, saying that from this little animal, which may have existed about 150 million years ago, descended the monkeys, and lastly, the gorilla. In this chain, the gorilla is our immediate ancestor, the precursor of humans. Some anthropologists, as I mentioned in my previous talk, do not hesitate to include the poor mouse in these matters, and they even want to include it in this chain. How? In what way? It would no longer be 7 components but 8. Let them and their theories be. They claim with an extraordinary air of wisdom that early humans were tiny, microscopic, so small that we would be astonished to see them today. What is this based on? The fact that the mouse is small, and according to them, we also come from a mouse. I don't know where they would include it, possibly before or after the lemur. We kept growing until we reached the height of the highly civilized and extraordinarily perfect civilization we have today. My goodness, today the mouse takes center stage in public discussions. If things continue this way, the government will have to prohibit the killing of mice because, according to them, they are nothing less than our ancestors. But where are the missing links? How is it possible that from a shark, just like that, a lizard appears overnight, or over a few centuries? Millions of years have passed, and the sharks remain peaceful. It has never been observed that new lizards are born from a species of sharks, either in the Atlantic or the Pacific. To start with, lizards, at least the ones I have known, if they are not too civilized yet and are still out there in the streets, inventing theories, are not found in the sea, but in rivers and lakes. Have you ever heard of any species of lizards or crocodiles emerging from the raging waves of the ocean? Everyone knows that lizards are freshwater creatures. I have seen them in large rivers, and I can vouch for that. I have also visited the oceans, and I have never seen or heard of any fisherman catching a lizard in the open ocean. They may catch sharks, but lizards? When? We are talking about concrete, clear, and definitive facts. And where are the links that would connect the lizard to the opossum? And where are the links that would connect the opossum to that lemur-like creature, which, despite the absence of a placenta, was identified by Haeckel as having a discoidal placenta? And continuing, where are the links that would connect that creature to the monkey? And finally, where are the links from the monkey to the gorilla? What are they? We are looking at concrete facts, missing links. Speaking like this without any basis is too absurd. Too much has been said in materialistic anthropology about the moneron, the atom of the watery abyss, the first pinch of salt in a Silurian ocean filled with mud at the bottom, where the first layer of rocks had not yet been deposited. But what is the origin of the moneron? Could something as extraordinary as the first atomic point of protoplasm, so perfectly organized and with such a complex structure, have resulted from chance, from randomness? I understand that when intelligent principles are denied in nature, the organization of protoplasm loses all sense. Time goes by, and materialistic anthropology will gradually be dismantled. Until now, materialist anthropologists have been unable to determine when and how the first human appeared. They have only come up with hypotheses, and these hypotheses are quite ridiculous, lacking serious foundations. Much is said in materialistic anthropology about the issue of Australia. The position of purely materialistic anthropology is very convenient, claiming that the existing tribes in Australia descend from monkeys. Scientifically, this falls apart. If brains are measured, and comparisons are made, the brain of a highly advanced gorilla is not even half the volume of that of an Australian savage. So, there must be a missing link between the most advanced gorilla and an Australian savage. Where is this missing link? Show it to us, we are all here to see it. Asserting something without a serious foundation is absurd. In my previous lecture, I mentioned that these materialist gentlemen claim with great pomp that they only believe in what they see, but the facts are showing their falsehood. They believe firmly in absurd hypotheses that they have never seen. Claiming that we come from a shark, and then establishing a chain of whims simply based on facial similarities, ultimately demonstrates an extreme superficiality. If they write this, it is truly an abuse of the intelligence of their readers. If they speak this way, they come across as terribly comical and even absurd in essence. We can agree that certain humans mixed with subhuman creatures in ancient Lemuria, giving rise to not only primates but also multiple bestial forms that still have documentation in both the east and the west of the world. As an example, we can mention some strange Lemurian simians that might naturally serve as a subject of ridicule for the shallow materialists of this era, but one must assert with courage what is real. I refer to a species that existed, which could move on both hands and feet like any simian but also stand upright on 2 feet, with blue and red faces. They were the product of certain humans mixed with subhuman creatures from the Miocene, especially during the Mesozoic era. It is said that they could speak. Above all, references to the above can be found in papyri, codices, bricks, ancient monuments, and ancient manuscripts. Therefore, multiple simian forms emerged in the ancient Mu continent. But how did humans originate? How did they come about? Up to now, this has been a true puzzle for Darwinian and Haeckellian materialists, and even for contemporary materialist anthropologists. Where could we find the origin of humans? Undoubtedly, it is in humans themselves, nowhere else. Let's focus on Australia now. What do materialist anthropologists say? That contemporary Australian tribes are descended from monkeys. Of course, they can't prove it, but they claim it, believe it, even though they say they can never believe anything they haven't seen. You can see how paradoxical these gentlemen are. The Australian clans are the most primitive ones existing in the world today. What would be the origin of these tribes? We would have to know the origin of Australia. Australia is indeed a piece of Lemuria, located in the Pacific, a very old land. Where would the ancestors of these tribes be? Let's talk about their physical bodies. Obviously, we would find these bone remains at the bottom of the Pacific Ocean, of beasts, because these Australian tribes are clearly a mix of certain humans with certain natural beasts. They have gone through many transformations and exist today. We would have to observe these tribes to see that they are obviously a mixture of ancient Lemurian inhabitants and certain beasts of nature. For example, in some areas of Australia, the hair on people's bodies is so abundant that it looks more like animal fur. This naturally provides an apparent basis for materialist gentlemen to say, "There you go, they are the offspring of anthropoids, our theory is proven." Materialist anthropologists are terribly superficial, and they lack mature understanding. Their minds are in a state of decay, degeneration, and that is truly unfortunate. If we genuinely want to find the origin of humans, we must thoroughly understand ontogeny. It is not possible to know phylogeny without including ontogeny. Observe the processes of recapitulation in the human being within the maternal womb. Nature always recapitulates. Look at a tree seed, a germ. There is a fully potential tree in that seed, waiting to develop, and for it to develop on this earth, it needs water, air, and sunlight. Nature recapitulates all the processes of the tree from which that germ was derived, unfolding slowly, leaf by leaf, just as other trees of the same kind grew. The tree from which this germ was derived always goes through a recapitulation process, leaf by leaf, until it finally bears fruit and seed, continuing the same recapitulations for the new trees. Observe how nature recapitulates all its marvels in the cosmos. Each year, spring, summer, autumn, and winter return, it's a perfect recapitulation. Similarly, in the maternal womb, there is a perfect recapitulation of the entire human species. All the phases that the human being went through from the most ancient origins are present in the maternal womb. First of all, no one could deny that in the womb, the fetus goes through the 4 realms of nature. First, it is a stone, second a plant, third an animal, and fourth a human. As a stone, as a germ or corpuscle, it is inorganic, it is the ovule that detaches from the ovary and unites with organic matter. Circulation leads this ovule deep into the organic matter for its development. In the second aspect, we see the vegetative state, something like a round carrot at its base and pointed at the top. Clinically studied, it might seem more like an onion with different layers, including a wonderful liquid. The possibility of the fetus, like the fruit of a plant, hangs from the navel of this apparent onion. That's the vegetative state. Later, the animal form appears. Yes, the fetus takes on the form of a tadpole, and this is well documented. Finally, it assumes the human form. The four phases are mineral, vegetable, animal, and human. But have we ever seen a monkey in there somewhere? What doctor or scientist has ever witnessed the phase of an anthropoid during fetal recapitulation, such as a catarrhine or platyrrhine monkey, or an orangutan or gorilla? So, what materialist science asserts is absurd. The origin of man must be sought in the womb of a woman. The origin of man lies in these recapitulation processes, the phases it has gone through. A shark has not appeared in the womb either. Where is it? What is it? The lemur, that little animal previously mentioned and which even Haeckel himself was passionate about, where is it? At what stage of pregnancy does it appear? Why do these gentlemen want to depart from the truth? Why do they not seek the origin of the human being within the human being? Why do they look for it outside? All the laws of nature exist within oneself, and if we don't find them within ourselves, we will never find them outside ourselves. But we have reached a very delicate and quite difficult point. That we were stones, plants, animals, humans, is accepted, but when? How? What primary or secondary causes governed all these processes? Enigmas. Could these enigmas ever be clarified? If the materialists were not fanatics of Euclidean three-dimensional geometry, everything would be different. Unfortunately, they are determined to force everyone to accept that dogma. They want to bottle us up within that dogma. It is as absurd as trying to bottle up universal life or enclose the ocean in a glass. The existence of a fourth dimension, a fourth vertical dimension, is undeniable, but it bothers the materialists. However, even Einstein, who collaborated in the creation of the atomic bomb, accepted the fourth dimension. In mathematics, no one can deny the fourth dimension. But the materialistic people of this era, even so, can't grasp the knowledge that higher dimensions may exist in nature. They forcibly want us to confine ourselves or self-confine in Euclidean three-dimensional space, and because of this false, absurd position they are in, physics is completely hindered in its progress. By this time, there should already be cosmic ships capable of traveling through the infinite, but such a desire is not possible as long as physics remains trapped in Euclidean three-dimensional dogma. If these gentlemen, who have not been able to answer the question of where and when man emerged, truly accepted the possibility of a fourth, fifth, sixth, and seventh dimension, everything would be different. But we are sure they won't accept it, ever. Why? Because their minds are in a state of degeneration due to sexual abuse, and in such conditions, they cannot accept the Gnostic postulates we present. Stone, plant, animal, human, that is the very foundation of serious anthropology. Let's think about the form before the human state, our legitimate ancestors. Undoubtedly, we would find animal life in nature, but situated in a fourth dimension, which is shocking for materialism. However, it is the materialists themselves who laughed at Pasteur and his theories, mocking him when he disinfected surgical instruments. They never believed in microorganisms because they couldn't see them, but now they accept them. Could there be animal life in a fourth dimension? Obviously, yes. Will there be any system, any method of verification? Certainly, but different from those of a materialistic science that lags behind. Who has these processes and systems? We have them, and we are happy to teach them to those who genuinely want to investigate in the field of pure science. So, was there animal life in the fourth dimension? It is obvious that there was. Was there plant life in the fifth dimension? There was. And was there mineral life in the sixth dimension? Yes, but I clarify that the mineral life of the sixth dimension, or the plant life of the fifth, or the animal life of the fourth, in no way resembles the mineral, plant, and animal life in our purely physical world. That mineral, plant, and animal life was later condensed here on this three-dimensional material globe, we do not deny it. But it took millions of years to happen. How could we possibly define the evolutionary processes from mineral to human? It would not be possible if we eliminated the question posed by Leibniz regarding monads, intelligent principles of nature, monads, or jivas. There is a vast chasm between Haeckel's atomic moneron and Manu's Zarastripa, or the jiva of the Hindus, or Leibniz's monad, whichever you prefer to call it. Because Haeckel's atomic moneron is far from being a true monad or the principle of life. So it is true that the virgin sparks or simply Leibniz's monads evolved in the mineral kingdom during the period of great activity in the sixth dimension. They also evolved in the plant kingdom in the fifth dimension and advanced to the animal state in the fourth dimension. This is unquestionable. These dimensions of nature are not far from the day when they can be seen through delicate optical devices. But until that day comes, we, the Gnostic anthropologists, can be sure that we will have to endure the same ridicule that Pasteur had to endure when he talked about microorganisms. But one day these dimensions will be perceptible through optics, and then the mockery will end. For now, as I mentioned to you, experiments are being attempted to transform sound waves into images, and when this is achieved, all the evolutionary and involutionary processes of nature will be visible. Then, the Antichrist of false science will be exposed before the solemn judgment of public consciousness. As for the human organism, do you not see that it is initially invisible? You cannot see a sperm and a fertilizing cell when the conception process begins, when the germ cell starts to form. Who could suppose that a creature could come from a sperm and a fertilizing cell? Can you see it with the naked eye? It is known to exist through a microscope, that is obvious. So, let's get down to the facts. The monads that passed through the mineral kingdom in the sixth dimension are the same ones that passed through the plant kingdom in the fifth and the animal kingdom in the fourth. And precisely at the end of the fourth, a certain creature similar to an anthropoid but not an anthropoid, not a gorilla, not a chimpanzee or anything like that appeared. As the time for the three-dimensional world of Euclid approached, this form underwent some changes, some metamorphoses, just as the Earth did, and eventually crystallized into the human form. Keep in mind that the morphology of human and natural creatures changes as centuries pass. Undoubtedly, human morphology emerged according to the Earth's protoplasmic age, coming into existence and, passing through the Hyperborean and Lemurian periods and the Atlantean period, the morphology changed slightly up to our days. The creatures that preceded us, the ancient human race, as attested by the traditions of ancient Mexico and various countries on Earth, were giants and have gradually lost stature to become what they are today. If we were to explain the four stages of mineral, vegetable, animal, and human life exclusively within the three-dimensional zone of Euclidean space on Earth, I am absolutely certain that it would turn into new unsolvable enigmas. As we delve into this issue and after the terrible failure of materialistic anthropology, which could not truly determine the date, how, or when man emerged, today, scientists have no choice but to accept the harsh reality of higher dimensions in nature and the cosmos. They can deny it, they have the right to deny it. They can laugh, but I've already said, whoever laughs at what they do not know is on the path to being an idiot. Why can't they see? Pasteur couldn't see microorganisms either, but nowadays optics can. As time goes on, materialistic science will be exposed by new discoveries. Every day it will sink further and further into the pit of its own ignorance. This notion of the Nopathecoidae with its three bastard sons, the tailless cynocephalus, the tailless monkey, and the tree-dwelling man is indeed good for a Molière and his caricatures. We certainly do not have anything of pathecoids in our blood, the facts speak for us. Glossary of the second lecture. Einstein, Albert, a German physicist, 1879 to 1955, naturalized in the United States in 1940. The author of numerous theoretical physics studies, he formulated the theory of relativity, of great significance in modern science. Eocene, it begins at the end of the Secondary Era and ends at the beginning of the Miocene. Jiva, Sanskrit, life, in the sense of the absolute, it also means the monad or atma-buddhi. Jiva also has meanings related to the vital principle, soul or living spirit, individual soul, human self, a creature or a living being, existence. At the end of a compound word, it means alive, living, or life-giving. Leibniz, Gottfried, a famous German philosopher, mathematician, physicist, historian, jurist, and theologian, born in Leipzig on July 6, 1646. He died in Hanover on November 14, 1716. In his works, including new essays on human understanding, theodicy, and monadology, he developed his philosophy. Manu, the name of 14 heroic figures in India, each of whom serves as the chief and origin of an era after which the world undergoes a momentary destruction. The first of these figures, the father of humankind, wrote the famous code known as Manavadharma Shastra. This code, divided into 12 books, deals with public and private law and the commandments of God. Mesozoic, a geological period that lasted approximately from 190 million to 70 million years ago. It is known as the era of the great reptiles. Monad, according to Leibniz's philosophy, a monad is an indivisible, unextended substance that represents the entire universe from its own point of view. Monads unfold in an immense series from the lowest order to the infinite. Ontogeny, the study of the development of an individual organism from its first germ cell to its mature state. For Haeckel, ontogeny is a brief recapitulation of phylogeny, the evolutionary history of a species, a principle known as the biogenetic law. Placenta, an organ rich in blood vessels in the embryos of placental mammals, allowing for the nourishment and respiration of the embryo by coming into close contact with the mother's uterine lining. The embryo is connected to the placenta by the umbilical cord. The formation of the placenta begins in the chorion and is related to the allantois. The chorion produces branched villi that contain blood vessels. When the villi grow in a rounded region, a discoidal placenta is formed, as in humans, insectivores, prosimians, monkeys, bats, and rodents. In several monkeys, 2 discs are formed, called a bidiscoidal placenta. Third lecture. The time has come to analyze certain aspects related to human beings. Certainly, in the name of truth, materialistic anthropology knows nothing about the true origin of man. In previous lectures, we made some brief analyses, and now we will delve deeper into this matter. Let's think for a moment about the Mesozoic times of our world, the era of the reptiles. During that time, humans truly existed. Of course, this is denied by materialistic anthropology. In truth, profane anthropology is ignorant of the real origin of the human being. Materialistic anthropology wants to deny the existence of man before the Quaternary period, refusing to acknowledge the possibility of human existence during the Cenozoic period, which is fundamentally absurd. However, there are things that make one think. Why could certain species, such as the plesiosaur and the pterodactyl, survive for so long and eventually die, with only their remains found in some museums today? Nevertheless, humans, despite the extinction of those species, continue to exist. Why did the species from the Mesozoic era go extinct, and how is it that human beings did not become extinct? So many species disappeared, but human beings still exist. How can this be? What explanation could materialistic science provide? It offers none. Clearly, the human species should have disappeared. If the species of the Tertiary and Quaternary periods disappeared, human beings should have vanished from the face of the earth, too. This leads us to infer the existence of humans long before the Quaternary era and even before the age of reptiles or the Carboniferous period. We have the right to claim the existence of humans in times that go beyond the Mesozoic era. This right is granted to us by the concrete fact that all species from the Tertiary and Quaternary periods have disappeared, yet human beings, their contemporaries, continue to exist. If other species vanished, we must deduce that, since the intellectual animals called humans did not disappear, they must have existed before the Mesozoic and Carboniferous eras. The facts support this conclusion, and facts are facts, and we must accept them. One thing is terribly true. The Bible, for example, tells us about flying serpents, and Job mentions the Leviathan. The Zohar emphatically states that the tempting serpent of Eden was a flying camel. By the way, it's worth noting that a kind of flying camel was found in Germany. I'm referring to fossil remains that could have been perfectly arranged by anthropologists. It's 78 feet in size, gigantic, with a long neck, very long, similar to that of camels, but equipped with membranous wings. When you examine the body of those bone remains, it becomes evident that it is indeed a flying serpent, similar to a camel in terms of its long neck. Could it possibly be the Leviathan? What would anthropologists say about that? Obviously, this saurian, or rather, mesosaur, is fundamentally only the remnant of what were the flying serpents of ancient times on our world or Earth. We conclude by saying that the mesosaur has a closer relationship with the ophidian than with the lacertid. Delving into all of this, we find other very interesting aspects in the field of anthropology. In the Imperial Library of Beijing, for example, there were paintings depicting plesiosaurs and even some pterodactyls. How is it possible that ancient people, who knew nothing about paleontography or paleontology, were aware of species that were already extinct from the same era as the reptiles? This is something that wouldn't have a logical explanation if we didn't know the possibility of developing certain transcendental faculties in the human brain, faculties that would enable us to study the history of nature and man in the very depths of the memories that lie hidden in everything that is, has been, and will be. In reality, my esteemed friends, we must know that this, the present-day man, is in no way the real man. The only thing we might agree with purely profane anthropologists on is the question of the intellectual animal. This one indeed comes from the Quaternary era or the end of the Tertiary era, which I would not deny. But, first and foremost, it is essential to make a clear distinction between man and the intellectual animal. The true man existed beyond the Carboniferous era and the Mesozoic age. This true man lived in the time of the reptiles. Unfortunately, some authentic human beings degenerated terribly at the end of the Tertiary era, during the Miocene. They mixed with some beasts of nature, as I mentioned in my previous talk. From this, certain gigantic simians were born, I'm repeating something I already mentioned, with blue or red faces, who walked on hands and feet or stood upright as bipeds, and had the ability to speak. These specimens, in turn, had to mix with other subhuman beasts, and from all of this, we now have the apes we know or, through certain evolutions, some types of humanoids. These humanoids continued to reproduce incessantly during the Quaternary era. Subsequently, in the age we are in now, these humanoids constitute the current humanity, a mixture of authentic men with beasts of nature. Now, you'll see the difference that exists between the real men of the first, second, and third races and the intellectual animals of the fourth and fifth races in which we find ourselves. However, we should not be discouraged by this. The germs for man are in the same sexual glands, and we carry them. There is no one who does not carry these germs since it is the result of the mixture of man with animals. If one carries these germs, there is the possibility of elevating oneself to true human status. Yes, but you have to work with these germs, and you really need to know the mysteries of sex to be able to create the authentic man within yourself. Unfortunately, materialistic anthropologists believe they are human beings, yet they absolutely know nothing about the mysteries of sex and invent multiple theories about the origin of the human species that could never truly be useful. I think all these theories of materialistic anthropologists are causing serious harm to the people. It is lamentable that materialistic anthropology is corrupting the human race, which is already degenerated enough. With such theories, degeneration continues to worsen each day. We Gnostic anthropologists have to judge materialistic anthropology very severely, those who say they only believe in what they see, and yet they believe in what they have never seen, in utopias as absurd as the one that claims we are the offspring of mice, or that our ancestor, the mandrill, is an elegant gentleman. Undoubtedly, we must seek the origin of this human race, of this fifth race to which we belong. We can find its cradle in places like Kashmir, the central plateau of Tibet, the Euxine, etc. I'm not saying that the complete cradle of the current race originated solely in the regions I mentioned. But, in the name of truth, I must say that these regions of the earth are very important cradles of the human species, one of several cradles. I refer to the current human species, the people of the fifth race. There have been 5 races in the world, corresponding to 5 different epochs. First, I said that there was the protoplasmic race, then the Hyperboreans, later the Lemurians, and then the Atlanteans. Finally, we have the current race, the Aryan. We will gradually develop, through these discussions, the history of each race, even if it's just a brief description of the scenarios in which they developed. Today, I will only say that the people of the first proper race existed in the polar cap of the north, on the sacred island. At that time, the polar caps, or rather, the poles, occupied the equatorial zone. Undoubtedly, the way of life of that race was very different from the current one. Materialistic anthropology knows nothing about that. Moreover, these statements would in no way agree with the famous Pangaea, and therefore, by making such declarations, the only thing we expose ourselves to is the ridicule of profane anthropologists. They truly don't understand the celestial mechanics at all. They don't know that the Earth's axis undergoes a process of revolution. They think that the Earth has always had the same position in relation to the Sun. Therefore, they have invented their Pangaea, which is more convenient for them than studying astronomy. The Hyperboreans had their stage in the horseshoe-shaped region surrounding the North Pole. Obviously, even England and Ireland belonged to the land of the Hyperboreans, and all these regions form a horseshoe around the North Polar Cap. Lemuria existed later in the Pacific Ocean, a huge and gigantic continent that covered the entire Pacific area. Atlantis existed later in the ocean that bears its name. Thus, the appearance of the Earth has changed many times. Our world has had 5 aspects or 5 stages in which 5 races have evolved. Could we expect the gentlemen of materialistic anthropology to accept all of this? Undoubtedly, no, because they believe they know it all and, in truth, they not only ignore but, what is worse, they don't even know that they don't know. They are trying to attack the biblical Genesis, and in their anti-clerical zeal, they have invented all these theories that abound here, there, and everywhere. They don't even want to understand what the word Eden means. In its etymology, there is a Greek root that explains this word, voluptuousness. So, Eden means voluptuousness. Eden is sex, and the entire biblical Genesis is a work of alchemy. It has nothing to do with history. That Eden, which was once situated in Mesopotamia between the Tigris and the Euphrates, later became the school of astrologers, Chaldeans, and magicians. This Eden seems to have a connection with the famous Adi Varsha of the ancient Lemurians and even with the Garden of the Hesperides of the Atlantean continent. Eden is sex, but the materialistic anthropologists would never accept that, and much less would they accept the great sexual mysteries of Chaldea, India, Babylon, Mexico, Persia, Egypt, etc. In Lemuria, there was a system of reproduction through cryosacty. This is during the Mesozoic era, long before the human race fell into animal generation. We know very well that this race fell in the third part of the Eocene, that is, during the Miocene. The true men of the Mesozoic era certainly reproduced through cryosacty, the power of will and intelligence. But they were men, and their system of reproduction would not be accepted today by the intellectual animals. Because the system of reproduction of true men is cryosacty, it is a sacred system that would cause laughter and rejection among materialistic anthropologists. Furthermore, they would be offended. At that time, sex was considered sacred, and the sacred sperm was never ejaculated. Sperm was considered venerable matter. Any mature zoosperm escaped to fertilize a womb, and the human race possessed immense powers, extrasensory faculties that allowed them to know all the wonders of the universe and the cosmos. That's why it's said they lived in a paradisiacal state. But when man fell into animal generation, that is, when he began to ejaculate the entity of semen, involution was precipitated. It was indeed in the third part of the Eocene that fallen man began to mix even with the very beasts of nature. From there, the intellectual animal was born. Undoubtedly, the intellectual animal could never accept the system of reproduction through cryosacty, precisely due to its animal condition. The system of cryosacty is not for the intellectual animals, but for men. They are two different realms. So, in reality, we should not be surprised that materialistic anthropologists reject the system of reproduction through cryosacty, and they are right to reject it because that system is not for the intellectual animals, I repeat, but for men. However, since the germs of man are, in spite of everything, in our endocrine glands, it is obvious that if we work with the sexual system of cryosacty, which is the system of men, we can truly regenerate the brain and develop the real man within the physiological, biological, and psychosomatic nature. But, I repeat, the intellectual animals do not like this. We, in Gnosis, have spread the mysteries of sex everywhere. While it is true that universal Gnosticism has accepted the system of reproduction through cryosacty, it is equally true that millions of intellectual animals have rejected it, and we cannot criticize them because they are intellectual animals, the product of the sexual relationship of certain men who degenerated in the tertiary era and mixed with beasts of nature. How could that product of men and beasts accept a sexual system that does not belong to them? Impossible. So, it is worth our while to reflect a little. But, well, let's move on to a more important point that I noted today for us to reflect upon. After all, where did all living species originate from? Where did this nature come from? Why should we have to accept all materialistic utopias? Why should we have to accept the dogma of evolution? Why should we have to live within the realm of hypotheses? The time has come to delve a little deeper into all these questions. In my previous talk, I said that the human species had developed in other dimensions. I also mentioned that the materialistic gentlemen do not accept these higher dimensions. They want us to be confined to the three-dimensional dogma of Euclid, like a pig that wants to stay in the pigsty all the time and doesn't want to see anything beyond the pigsty. But we do not accept these dogmas. First, because the hypotheses they have made are not proven, as Haeckel asserts. In fact, he states emphatically that neither geology nor phylogeny would ever be exact sciences. If the theories of one day disappear the next day, if these gentlemen are asserting what they have never seen, despite claiming that they only believe in what they see, if they are lying in this way, then we cannot and should not give them any credit. We have to turn to the wisdom of the ancients, as universal Gnosis teaches. The idea that the human race would have developed in other dimensions is impossible for materialistic science, but it is a reality for Gnostics. If the ancient sages could speak of the plesiosaur, if they could mention various beasts from the eras of the reptiles and even from the Carboniferous period, without knowing, as I already mentioned, paleontology or paleontography or having all these jargons in their heads, it's because they possessed extraordinary faculties that can be developed and reside within the human brain. Can the gentlemen of materialistic anthropology claim that they already know the human brain thoroughly? Obviously not. Furthermore, I clearly state that medical science still does not truly know the human body. They may believe they know it, but they do not. So, finally, what is the origin of humanity, the earth, races, nature, and everything that has been, is, and will be? This is what we need to reflect on in this chapter. What do the Nawas tell us about the Omeacan? What is the Omeacan? It is said that in the Omeacan, there is only wind and darkness, as the Nawas affirm. The Omeacan is also called Yoalia Hecatl, due to the wind and darkness. This should invite us to reflection. What would the Eastern world tell us about the Omeacan, not only the scholars in our country, Mexico, but also the Asians? I once talked here about what matter is in itself. I said that the form could be destroyed, but as a substance, matter continued in other dimensions, and ultimately, the substance of the earth or the germ of the earth was deposited in the deep space of the universe, in the unknown zero dimension. That's what I stated. I also said that this substance was the Iliastur, the seed that would be deposited in the depth of space, awaiting the time of a new cosmic manifestation. Remember that I clarified this a bit more by saying that, just as when a tree dies, its seed remains, and within it are all the possibilities for the development of a new tree. When a world dies, its seed, the homogeneous, tasteless, insubstantial, odorless, colorless matter, is deposited within the bosom of the eternal mother space. Well, this seed, in relation to the one, is two. We must not forget that to be one must first be two, and the one feels like two. This primordial chaotic earth is the germ of a world deposited within the mother space. It is the Omeacan, a true paradise that, during the time of inactivity, vibrates with happiness. Also, the Omeacan is called Yoaliahecatl due to the wind and darkness. Why? Because Ahecatl is the god of cosmic movement, the god of the wind. Yoaliahecatl, that's the great cosmic movement in the Omeacan. It is in the Omeacan where the true happiness of the world reigns. Inexhaustible, profound bliss. There are cosmic days and cosmic nights. When the earth is in a germinal state, when any world is in a germ state deposited within the bosom of deep space, it sleeps, and being two, it is one. After a certain period of inactivity, the electric impulse, the electric hurricane, causes all the positive and negative aspects to become active. That's why it is said that in the Omeacan there is darkness and wind, cosmic movement. We don't mean darkness in the complete sense of the word. This is just an allegorical way of speaking. Remember that in the Egyptian mysteries, the priest would approach the neophyte and whisper in their ear, "Osiris is a black god." It's not that Osiris was actually black, for he is the Logos, but it is because the light of the pure spirit, the light of the great reality, is darkness to the intellect. And when it is said that in the Omeacan, there is only darkness and wind, meaning cosmic movement, it is meant that the uncreated light is there, and the cosmic movement represented by Ahecatl is developed there. In the Omeacan, infinite stillness swirls before the manifestation of the great solar Logos. The solar Logos, in the sacred land of Anahuac, has always been called Quetzalcoatl. So Quetzalcoatl, as the Logos, undoubtedly exists long before all cosmic manifestations. It is the Logos. The Omeacan is the cosmic navel of the universe, where the infinitely large bursts into the infinitely small, in mutual whirlpools that vibrate and pulsate intensely. There, the macrocosm and the microcosm meet. With the dawn of the universe, the electric hurricane sets all atoms in motion, forming whirlwinds within the Omeacan, within the navel of the universe, within the cosmic matrix that is the two. In the Omeacan, the Tloknawakwe is the night storm of all possibilities. Why? Because when the electric motion, the electric hurricane, the electric whirlwind, set all those atoms in chaotic matter in motion, all the possibilities of universal life persist. This is what the best authors of cosmogony have always written. Naturally, we are saying something that materialistic science would never accept in any way. In the Omeacan, the Lord of the Night, the Black Tezcatlipoca denies himself, bursts into light, and gives birth to the universe that fertilizes, that Quetzalcoatl, the solar Logos, manages. Let us remember that this Tezcatlipoca, in its feminine aspect, represents the moon and the mother goddess. The Omeacan is precisely that, the mother goddess, the matrix of the world. This is why it is said that Tezcatlipoca bursts into light, yes, the mother swells like a lotus flower, and finally, this universe is born, which indeed fertilizes the Logos. In Nahuatl, it is said that Quetzalcoatl then directs and manages this universe that comes into existence. The Logos, the perfect multiple unity, is radical, but it also unfolds into the 49 fires to work with this nascent universe. Undoubtedly, it is the Logos Quetzalcoatl who directs this universe. It is better to say that it is the cosmic consciousness governing, directing what is, has been, and will be. I am absolutely certain that materialistic anthropology would not accept this conception of Quetzalcoatl. I am absolutely sure that materialistic anthropology rejects the Logos, that it is against Mexican tradition, and wants nothing to do with the wisdom of Mexico. Materialistic anthropology, by rejecting Quetzalcoatl as the true ruler of the universe, is, in fact, against Mexico itself. So, my dear friends, it's worth reflecting a bit. It's also not advisable for us to form an anthropomorphic conception of our Lord Quetzalcoatl. No. I repeat, Quetzalcoatl is a perfect multiple unity, it is the demiurge of the Greeks, the Platonic Logos, the prime principle of nature, making every atom vibrate, every sun tremble, it is the created fire from the first moment. The materialistic monism has certainly never been able to assure us that they know the fire. I am sure they do not know it, much less electricity. We are interested in the fire of fire and the profound knowledge of electricity. They use fire and consider it an element of combustion, but they are mistaken. In truth, if we strike a match, we will see that fire arises. They would say, a product of combustion. No, sir, rather, combustion is a product of fire, because the hand that strikes the match has fire to move, and the fire is latent within the match itself. It is enough to eliminate that case of chemical phosphorus substances by striking it to make the fire arise. Fire exists before the match, it is something unknown to chemistry. Fire itself is the Logos, the fundamental intelligent principle of nature. Note that we are not defending an anthropomorphic God that would bother the gentlemen of materialistic anthropology. No. We are only emphasizing that nature has intelligent principles, and the sum of intelligent principles in nature is Quetzalcoatl, the demiurge of the Greeks, the Platonic Logos, the perfect multiple unity latent in every atom, in every corpuscle that comes to life, in every creature that exists under the sun. There is no doubt, my dear friends, that monotheism has caused great harm to humanity because, as a consequence of it, materialism and atheism were provoked. I also say that polytheism, when taken to excess, has harmed humanity because it gave rise to monotheism, and from monotheism, in turn, emerged materialistic atheism. You can see how polytheism, when it degenerated, gave rise to anthropomorphic monotheism, and, finally, if you examine the sequence carefully, anthropomorphic monotheism, due to the abuses of various religious clergy, gave rise to materialistic atheism. If we accept intelligent principles in nature and the cosmos as the foundation of all this machinery of relativity, we do not ignore that, fundamentally, variety is unity. I believe that, in the near future, humanity will have to return to polytheism but in a transcendental monastic form. Spiritually, humanity must find a balance between monotheism and polytheism. Only then can a true renewal of principles and a complete revolution of consciousness begin. Glossary of the third lecture. Adi Varka, the first land, the first country where the first races lived. Anahuac, a Nahuatl word that means near or by the water, which the natives of the country used to describe the Mexican coast. Some authors have applied the term to the Great Mexican Plateau, where the capital is located. Kashmir, an ancient state in India, now divided between the Republic of India, the state of Jammu and Kashmir, and Pakistan. Carboniferous, referring to a geological period in which large coal deposits formed in the Earth's crust. This period is the fourth and last of the Paleozoic era. It follows the Devonian period and precedes the Mesozoic era. It is also known as the Permian Carboniferous period due to the inclusion of the Permian epoch. Cosmogenesis, the origin or formation of the universe. Cosmic day, Mahanvantara or Mahakulpa. A period of cosmic manifestation during which all existing things come to life. Hesperides, daughters of Atlas, 3 sisters who possessed a garden with apple trees that produced golden apples. The garden was guarded by a 100-headed dragon. Hercules went to the garden, defeated the dragon, and obtained the golden apples, completing the 11th of his labors. Iliaster, homogeneous, pure, substantial matter that crystallizes into the familiar sensible forms. Sacred Island, Thule. The place where the first human race developed. At that time, over 300 million years ago, it was located on the equator. However, due to the Earth's axial shifts, it is now in the North Pole. Mario Rosso de Luna says that this island still exists but is in a genus state. Kriya-Shakti, see Kriya-Zakti. Kriya-Zakti, Sanskrit, the power of thought, one of the 7 forces of nature. The creative power of the cities, powers, of perfect yogis. Lacertids, a family of reptiles in the suborder of Iguania, order Squamata, class Reptilia. They inhabit Europe, Asia, Africa, and America, preferring sunny locations and feeding primarily on insects and worms. Leviathan, a sea monster symbolizing evil, embodying all vices and sins. Nahuas or Nahuatl Lakes, a group of tribes in the Americas, primarily consisting of the Aztecs, who founded the Mexican Empire, as well as the Nicaraguans of Nicaragua, the Papiles of Central America, and some Shishimika tribes, though not all. Cosmic night, pralaya. Dissolution of the universe. Upon reaching the ocean of the universal spirit of life, it submerges into the absolute abstract space. 2. Ophidia, order of vertebrates in the reptile class. Omeacan, the navel of the world. Paleontography, treatise on organic beings that existed in more or less remote times. It can be divided into 2 branches, one that refers to animal remains, i.e., paleozoology, and one that concerns plants, i.e., paleontology. Plesiosaurids, family of vertebrates in the reptile class, order of Sauropterygia, characterized by having limb-like fins, short forearm and leg bones, nearly as wide as they are long, usually with no distinct clavicle in the pectoral girdle, very large coracoids, directly connected to the sternum or the digital part of the clavicles by a central anterior process. Pterodactyl, genus of vertebrates in the reptile class, order of Plesiosaurs, family of pterodactyls. The number of pterodactyl species known from the mid-secondary deposits corresponding to the Upper Jurassic exceeds 20, with the German lithographic limestones providing the highest number of forms. Quetzalcoatl, deity of the ancient Mexicans, worshipped by the Toltecs, literally meaning feathered serpent. Tezcatlipoca, god worshipped by the pre-Columbian Mexicans. During the conquest, he was the true king of the Mexican Olympus. He was presented as a young deity with a large mirror in his left hand, 4 arrows, and a shield in his right hand, with one ear somewhat darkened, wearing a belt with his hair attached. Zohar, the primary work of Kabbalah, written in Aramaic in the form of a commentary on the Pentateuch. It contains a wealth of Neoplatonic and Gnostic interpretations of the Bible. The compiler of the Zohar was Moses de Leon from Spain. The Zohar consists of 3 parts. 1. Sifra Ditzniata, the Book of the Hidden Secret. 2. Reya Mehemna, the Faithful Shepherd, and 3. Tikkunia Zohar, the Corrections of the Zohar. 1. See the book Quetzalcoatl by José López Portillo. 2. See the book Message of Christmas 1869–1970 by Samael Aun Weor. 3. See the book The Perfect Matrimony by Samael Aun Weor. 4th lecture. First and foremost, it's important to know that anthropologists talk about 3 very important eras, the Paleozoic era, the Mesozoic era, and the Cenozoic era. They emphatically assert that during the Paleozoic era, the first unicellular beings, microorganisms, molluscoids, mollusks, fish, and the first reptiles existed over the waters of life. They make these claims with incredible certainty, as if they had been present in those archaic times, as if they could truly see, smell, touch, and hear everything that happened in those ages. However, as I have mentioned in previous lectures, and I repeat it now, anthropologists of materialism always affirm that they only believe in what they see, that they would never accept anything they haven't seen with their own eyes or touched with their own hands. Although I have to reiterate this many times, I must say that such a statement is completely false and deceptive. So, my dear brothers and sisters, they are believing in something they have never seen, something they have never touched. They are asserting incredibly false assumptions. When did they see that ancient era? When were they present during the Paleozoic era? Did they live during the Mesozoic era? Did they exist during the Cenozoic era? They are asserting mere assumptions that they have no evidence for, affirming what they have never seen, and yet, they consider themselves eminently practical. They keep saying again and again that they only believe in what they see, but they have never seen the Paleozoic era. What do they know about that era and the forms of life that existed in that ancient age of our world? They also talk about the Mesozoic era, the era of the ancient reptiles. We do not deny that the era of the reptiles existed, it was a fact. Our Earth was inhabited by enormous reptiles, and this is undeniable. Let's remember the Brontosaurus or Brontosaurus, the Plesiosaurus, the pterodactyl, and so on. All these saurians were indeed gigantic, huge monsters that were as much as 1 or 2 blocks in size. They existed, but do the materialist anthropologists have any evidence that they saw all the reptiles of the Mesozoic era? How did they reproduce? How did they live? Were they witnesses to that? Next comes the era known as the Cenozoic. It is said that many reptiles evolved into mammals during this period. It is emphatically stated that the first hominids, ancestors of the wrongly called human intellectual animal, came from primates. There is no doubt, they say, that primates gave birth to the first hominids, as well as the large apes from the ancient era, the period we could call Cenozoic. This is how they adjust their theories to somewhat align with Darwin's theories. But did these primates actually exist? Did materialist anthropologists ever see the first hominids? Can they swear, perhaps, that these hominids gave birth to both the giant apes and humans, according to them? Could they emphatically state that primates indeed gave birth to hominids, the ancestors of humans, as they claim? Would they dare to say that all the giant gorilla and chimpanzee species that populated and once populated the earth in ancient times also came from these primates? What do these materialists know about that? On the other hand, as always, Haeckel, with his theories, assigns about 17 or 18 genealogies to modern humanoids, derived from marsupials and mammals. He talks about it with such certainty as if he had seen it. However, these materialist gentlemen have no problem believing in Haeckel's Sajara, a kind of stupid pithecoid with the ability to speak, 1,000 times more fantastic and utopian than the assertion that we come from Manu or Dhyani Kohan. Yet, humanity still believes in Dhyani Kohan, even if it annoys these materialist gentlemen. Millions of people still believe in the father of Manu, in Asia they believe in him, in the spirit man, in the prototype man, situated at a much higher level of being. If we were to conduct retrospective research with procedures very different from those of carbon-14 or potassium argon, we would discover that, in reality, the prototypes of this humanity originate from higher dimensions of nature and the cosmos. However, speaking this way to the materialist anthropologists is more than impossible because they feel as uncomfortable as the Chinese when they listen to Western music. So, it's time to judiciously analyze the materialistic culture that serves as the basis for peoples and nations. We must seek the origin of so much corruption and wickedness. It is unacceptable that we continue to allow humanity to be a victim of ignorance, that is 100% absurd. Mr. Haeckel's 17 or 18 genealogies and his followers are suitable for Molière and his caricatures. To claim that those lemurs, small animals with very bright eyes, had placentas and could be counted among our ancestors is absurd because we know very well that lemurs never had placentas. This is an unforgivable zoological error. Haeckel has indeed done great harm to humanity, that's why we once said, let his memories be forgotten, and let his name never be placed on the streets, parodying the prophet Job. Furthermore, during Haeckel's time, embryogenesis was not yet known. How, then, does Haeckel dare to speak of lemurs with placentas? This is absurd in every way. When one analyzes these things, one cannot help but feel disgust for the school of materialism that is corrupting humanity, robbing it of its eternal values, and leading it down the path of involution. What is the true ancestor of the man from the Cenozoic era? And what are his descendants? What are the ancestors of the Paleolithic man, and what are his descendants? Did Mr. Darwin ever know them? Did Haeckel or Mr. Huxley ever know them? On what does materialistic anthropology base its authority to speak about Homo sapiens with such certainty? Which era did the primordial man belong to? In vain will Mr. Huxley try to find the fossil remains of the primordial man among the underground layers of the Quaternary era. Indeed, he will never find them. The man is older than the materialistic pigs suppose. The man of the Cenozoic era existed, as did the man of the Mesozoic era and the man of the Paleozoic era. However, materialism will never accept this. They want man to come strictly from the Quaternary era and in no way accept that he existed during the Cenozoic era. So, the time has come for great reflections and analyses. What do they know about how life evolved during the primary, secondary, tertiary, and quaternary eras? Give each human being their monad, and you will see that all this theater of Haeckel, Mr. Darwin, Huxley, Marx, and their followers will crumble to dust because materialistic anthropology is a wall without foundations. A slight push will turn it into fine sediment. In my previous lecture, I talked about the navel of the universe. The famous materialist anthropologists should study that. Why not consider that our Earth has a navel? When we are born and come into the world, we also have our navel, and as above, so below. So, in our previous lecture, we spoke about the Omeacan. We said something, yes. What is the Omeacan? The navel of the universe, yes. One day the moon Earth existed, it had seas, mountains full of life, vegetation, it also had its Paleozoic, Mesozoic, Cenozoic periods. But worlds, like everything that is, was, and will be, are born, grow, age, and die. The mere physical matter of the moon died. Today it is a corpse, as demonstrated by the astronauts who landed on the lunar surface. But life itself, the living substance of matter, did not die, it continued to process in a fourth dimension, in a fourth vertical dimension, along with the seeds of everything that exists. That material substance later processed into a fifth dimension, and then a sixth, and later a seventh. And when it fell into the seventh, it submerged into the bosom of absolute abstract space. That homogeneous substance, that malaprakriti of the Orientals, that primordial earth or substance, continues to exist. It was a seed that could not be lost, and now it was deposited in deep space. In that seed, life continued latent. That seed, I said and repeat today, is the Iliaster of the wise. That seed slept 7 eternities in the chaos, that is, in deep space, to be clearer. But much later, the electric whirlwind, the electric hurricane, darkness and wind, as the people of Anahuac say, inhabited that primordial world, that land called Iliaster. And that was when the two functioned with their positive and negative opposites, male and female. Thus, the chaos emerged from the Iliaster. That's why in the Omeacan, hurricanes, storms, and darkness prevail. Ehecatl is clearly mentioned there. Ehecatl is the god of the wind, hurricanes, electric movement. The macrocosm poured into the microcosm, everything in constant activity. Thus, the chaos indeed existed in the Omeacan, it was the same Omeacan, a virginal, pure, ineffable land that the materialist anthropology would never accept. All possibilities were there until the universal fire made that chaos fertile. And when it made it fertile, the limbus appeared. That extraordinary limbus gave rise to everything that is, has been, and will be. Since then, from the navel of the universe, there were successive unfoldments through various dimensions, and the merely germinal man passed into protoplasm. And the evolving and involuting life, through several dimensions, finally crystallized on the protoplasmic earth. There was an initial manifestation in the world of the mind, in the region of the cosmic mind or universal intelligence. A second manifestation of everything that is, has been, and will be in a second period. And then, as a result, a third manifestation appeared in a subsequent dimension. Thus, life unfolded, evolved, and involuted in three extraordinary dimensions before it appeared in this physical world. Life existed first in the mineral state, but a type of minerals that today would not be accepted by materialist anthropologists or geologists. Much later, it developed in the vegetable state, and subsequently in the animal state. But those states, mineral, vegetable, and animal, are currently unknown. They constitute something like the archetype of these existing mineral, vegetable, and animal kingdoms. It is obvious that before life appeared on our protoplasmic world, a creature very similar to any mammal or simian, but truly different from simians, emerged from existing animal species. When that original or primordial man managed to crystallize in a dense form, he underwent a morphological transformation and appeared on the polar cap of the North, which was once located in the equatorial zone. In my next talk, I will discuss the movement of continents. And then we will tell the world what Pangaea really is. Today, we will only say that life developed in other dimensions before crystallizing in the physical world. Today, I also want to emphasize that before the intellectual animal, mistakenly called man, truly existed, the real man existed in the first, second, and third races. The intellectual animal, which emerged in the Quaternary era, is not man, but the intellectual animal, I repeat. In the previous talk, I said that real men lived splendidly in Lemuria, but some degenerated in the end and mixed with beasts, and from that mixture, the current humanity, the intellectual animal, emerged. So, the time has come to understand these delicate issues. Man is older than the Quaternary, as well as the tertiary, secondary, or primary eras. The fact that, despite the disappearance of all living species from ancient times, the intellectual animal called man continues to exist is proof of this. If it can survive despite so many storms, despite the Earth's axis revolutions, despite the events of Pangaea, and if animals, reptiles, and other species from the Mesozoic periods, etc., were unable to survive, this shows that man is older than all the periods marked and indicated by materialist anthropologists. I want you to deeply reflect on all these issues. Give the poor intellectual animal its monad, which they are trying to take away, and all that theatre of Mr. Darwin, Haeckel, and Huxley will crumble to dust. The time has come to truly unmask materialistic anthropology. It is time to restore eternal values to humanity. Fifth lecture. There are cosmic and geological events and facts that are well worth studying in these anthropology treatises. There is no doubt that Gnostic anthropology unveils all the veils related to the origin of man and the universe. Obviously, this nature's mechanics are marvelous, but we would never accept the possibility of mathematics without a mathematician or mechanics without mechanics. I don't want to defend an anthropomorphic God, in the style of the Jewish Jehovah, with the doctrine of an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. We know that such dogmatism results in a reaction of an atheistic and materialistic nature, by opposition. It is necessary to understand that any abuse is harmful to humanity. In ancient times, worship was offered to the gods, that is, to the intelligent principles of nature and the cosmos, to the demiurge architect of the universe, who is not a human or divine subject, rather, it is the perfect multiple unity, the Platonic Logos. Unfortunately, in the Augustan Rome of the Caesars and even in ancient Greece, there was a process of religious degeneration. When worship of the gods was abused, monotheism with its anthropomorphic god emerged in reaction. Much later, monotheism with its anthropomorphic god, as a result of the abuse of polytheism, gave rise to current materialism. So, the abuse of polytheism results in anthropomorphic monotheism, the belief in the biblical anthropomorphic God. In turn, the abuse of monotheism generates materialistic atheism. These are the religious phases through which peoples pass. Frankly, in the name of truth, I consider it time to eliminate this anthropomorphic monotheism that has caused so many problems. There would be no current materialistic atheism if the religious clergy had not abused such worship. This worship emerged as a reaction. Unfortunately, materialistic atheism was born in response to anthropomorphic monotheism, and in turn, the belief in an anthropomorphic God resulted from the abuse of polytheism when worship of the gods of the universe degenerated. We need to recognize the intelligent principles of nature and the cosmos. But I repeat, we are not defending an anthropomorphic God. Recognizing intelligent principles seems to resist any scientific analysis. For example, let's observe an anthill. There, we see the intelligent principles in full activity, how those ants work, how they build their palaces, how they govern themselves, etc. The same happens with a beehive, their order is astonishing. If we endow each ant or bee with a Pythagorean monad or an Indo-Stan jiva, it is logical that the entire anthill or beehive makes sense because all creatures live from a monadic principle. Haeckel's, Darwin's, and Huxley's materialism would be completely destroyed by this. We are not worshipping any anthropomorphic God. We only want nature to be recognized as intelligent. It does not seem absurd to us that nature is endowed with intelligence. The order in the construction of the molecule and the atom clearly demonstrates the intelligent principles. We are in the right time to review principles. If we do not agree with materialism, it is because it does not withstand a thorough analysis, it is pure nonsense, that is obvious. The creation of man through mechanical processes is more incongruous than Adam instantly emerging from the mud of the earth. Both are equally absurd. Let's recognize that there is intelligence in all this nature's mechanics, in the movement of atoms around their center of gravity, in the movement of worlds around their suns. It is true that our sun, the one that illuminates us and gives us life, is one of the suns in that great constellation that revolves around Alcyone, which has been called the Pleiades since ancient times. That there are 7 suns orbiting Alcyone is not strange. We live in a corner of the Pleiades, on a small planet that orbits the Sun, which is populated by intellectual animals. This tiny world is called Earth. In general, each of the Pleiades suns gives life to the corresponding worlds that revolve around them. It is true, and we do not deny it, that our planet Earth is a small world that revolves around the 7th sun of the Pleiades. It is equally true that the Pleiades need an intelligent guiding principle. Naturally, the materialistic pigs do not believe in anything but fat and lard, they are determined to reduce the poor trick-entered or 3-brained biped to a mere 2-dimensional production and consumption machine. Materialists want to take away from humanity the intelligent principles, they forcefully want to strip away all human mentality of its eternal values, the values of being. We understand perfectly that by taking away from humanity the values of being, it degenerates horribly. This is what is happening in these moments of global crisis and bankruptcy of all principles. The know-it-alls of materialist anthropology persist in leading the poor people of the 20th century down the path of most frank perdition. The Pleiades need a guiding principle or guiding principles to avoid anthropomorphism this time, which has been so fatal, as it has produced materialistic atheism. The guiding principle is plural but has a representation that the materialist swine would never accept in any way. I want to refer to the equatorial astral sun of the Pleiades, invisible to the lenses of telescopes but visible to those who have developed the most extraordinary type of vision, which is the prajnaparamita intuition in its highest degree. This term is quite difficult because it is in Sanskrit, and it is unacceptable to atheistic anthropology but real in its transcendence for true humans. The equatorial sun of the Pleiades intelligently coordinates all cosmic, human, mineral, vegetable, and animal activities, and even this group of celestial bodies known as the Pleiades. In reality, the equatorial sun is the sum of intelligent principles, abhorred by the followers of materialism. But the world is the world, and it will always be. Materialism always produces brain and mind degeneration, involution of human values, total decadence, incapacity for the development of the objective reason of being. The Pleiades, with their sun, constitute a beautiful panorama of the universe. The sun of the Pleiades is not a visible sun, it is an astral sun located in the 5th dimension. If we were to accept only 3 dimensions, if we were bottled in Euclidean 3-dimensional geometry, we would be like the materialist atheists who only believe, like donkeys, in the grass they see. The intelligent principles of that astral sun maintain perfect harmony in the Pleiades, something we do not ignore. We have methods and procedures for the development of certain transcendental faculties of being that allow us to see beyond simple telescopes and delve beyond microscopes. We must consider not only the Pleiades but the entire galaxy in which we exist, the grand Milky Way, with its 100,000 suns, millions of worlds, moons, and loose stones. An extraordinary galaxy that orbits around Sirius. Undoubtedly, this sun is gigantic. Near Sirius, there is a moon 5,000 times denser than Lead. This moon orbits Sirius. Extraordinary radiations come from Sirius toward cosmic matter. We must not deny that from that moon, 5,000 times denser than Lead, also come terrible subhuman radiations. It could be said that the radiations from Sirius affect all the supraskies of anything, and the dark infraradiations from the surrounding satellite affect the infrahells, causing chaotic states in the minds of human creatures, generating materialistic atheism, etc. But the galaxy itself, with all its extraordinary order, with its spiral-shaped form orbiting around the Sirius Sun, undoubtedly needs intelligent principles to govern it. The polar sun comes to mind at this moment. Obviously, in this sun are the intelligent principles that wisely control, govern, and coordinate this galaxy in which we live, move, and have our being. It is a marvelous spiritual sun that directs the entire Milky Way. Clearly, without intelligent principles, this galaxy, even if it revolved entirely around Sirius and were intelligently governed, would still lack something more. It would lack the spiritual sun, the polar sun, which is the foundation of all these intelligent principles. But this matter does not end here, we have to go further. Einstein already said, the infinite tends towards a limit. He also asserted that the infinite is curved. There is no doubt that there are many infinities. Beyond this infinity, there is another infinity. And much further, between infinity and infinity, there are empty spaces. There is no limit to the many infinities. Our infinity, Einstein's infinity, has about 100,000 galaxies, with an average of 100,000 suns each, with their corresponding millions of worlds. This is what can be perceived with telescopes. But in reality, this infinity in which we live needs sovereign intelligent principles to coordinate it, to avoid collisions and all kinds of failures as much as possible. Fortunately, there is the central sun, the sacred absolute Sunday. In this sacred absolute sun are the guiding intelligences of this entire infinity. In it, I repeat, we live, move, and have our being. Intelligence governs the entire cosmos, in the infinitely small and the infinitely large, in the macrocosm and the microcosm, in a system of worlds, in a beehive, and in an anthill. Cosmic intelligence resides precisely in every particle of this great creation. We live here, as we have already said, on a small planet in the infinite universe, in a tiny world that revolves around the seventh sun of the Pleiades, whose mechanics are governed by intelligent principles. Unquestionably, geologists who have studied so much do not understand the living mechanics of this planet Earth. It has always been believed that the continents on which we exist are fixed, firm, and immovable, but that concept is incorrect. We, the Gnostic scientists, know that the Earth's structure resembles an egg more than a firm mass. If we observe a bird's egg, we will see that it has a movable yolk supported by egg white. The same happens with the Earth. The continents are like the yolk supported by a clear, pasty, fluid, and gelatinous substance. That yolk is not still, it moves and rotates periodically on an axis. One day, all of America and Europe were together, and now they are separate. This is what materialistic anthropologists say about Pangaea. They are unaware of the rhythms, the periodic movements, and the true geological history. There is more than enough evidence to demonstrate the movement of continental masses. One day, Atlantis existed in the ocean that bears its name, a continent that has been questioned by materialism's followers. Atlantis has been conclusively proven by true sages who have appeared on Earth from time to time. The idea that the continent sank like cream in milk is absurd. It is a foolish statement by the enlightened ignorant. If Atlantis sank, it was a consequence of the Earth's axis revolution, but this is not known by materialism's adherents. The catastrophe of Atlantis left our continents in a precarious situation. If you observe the Americas, you will see that they slope toward the Pacific Ocean, as if trying to sink into the ocean, while the eastern side rises. It is similar to what happens to a ship, it never sinks vertically but always to one side. The Andes mountain range itself leans toward the Pacific Ocean. Let's look at Europe. It is undoubtedly inclined to sink through the Mediterranean, it is more submerged into the depths. The same occurs with Germany and Russia. The Asian continent is inclined, as if wanting to sink into the Indian Ocean. The continents were damaged by the great catastrophe of Atlantis, which unbalanced the geological formation of our world. We have talked a lot about suns, catastrophes, and all their consequences. The sons of Anahuac invite us to reflect since they are very interesting. They are of fire, air, water, and earth. They mark terrible cosmic catastrophes. It is said that the offspring of the first sun, the protoplasmic beings, perished, devoured by tigers. Clearly, the tigers of wisdom. It is said that the offspring of the second sun, the Hyperboreans, perished, swept away by strong hurricanes. This refers to the humanity that lived around the North Pole. It is affirmed that the offspring of the third sun, the Lemurians, perished due to the rain of fire and great earthquakes. The offspring of the fourth sun, the Atlanteans, perished by water. The offspring of the fifth sun, the Aryans, the people of this era, will perish by fire and earthquakes. This will happen, and it will be fulfilled in a short time. The offspring of the sixth sun, the Karadi, in the future earth of tomorrow, will also die. After discussing the sons of Anahuac, we will move on to a smaller cycle. Naturally, there is always a primary, secondary, tertiary, and quaternary age. We will not relate these ages to the 5 races that have existed. This time, we will base them on something different, precisely the movements experienced by the Earth's yoke, that geological movement that occurs periodically on its own axis, in the movement of continents on that pasty and gelatinous substance. From this point, we can speak of primary, secondary, tertiary, and quaternary ages, of an Eocene, of a primary period unknown to people, of the Oligocene, Miocene, and Pliocene, with this kind of catastrophes, which also exist, with terrible glaciations, we do not deny it. Atlantis marks the end of the Tertiary era. In the end of Atlantis, I clarify, the Tertiary era was beautiful with its Edens and delightful with its great paradises. There have been several glaciations. There is no doubt that we are approaching another glaciation. There are catastrophes caused by the Earth's axis revolution, by the verticalization of the world's poles. There are also catastrophes caused by the movement of continents. Then, earthquakes occur, and glaciations come. There are talk of 5 glaciations that occurred in accordance with the movements of continents, but we must know that there have been glaciations caused by the verticalization of Earth's poles. There are multiple catastrophes and glaciations, obviously. If we were to say that humans did not exist in the Eocene, Miocene, and Pliocene periods, we would be asserting something false. It is curious that as the archaic animal species became extinct, humans continued to exist. I am talking about humans in the conventional sense, because we already know that the intellectual animal is not the true human, but it is clear that we have to speak in some way. Have there been terrible changes? Yes, there have been. Think about that human race that emerged from the Eocene with its tropical climate, that race developed during the Oligocene with its average temperature, and finally, that race that lived in the Miocene with cold, with low temperatures that persisted until the last glaciation. What is interesting is that despite so many glaciations and catastrophes, humans continue to exist. There is still the Paleolithic man. Unbelievable, but true. All the archaic animal species disappeared, the huge reptiles of the Mesozoic, and yet humans continue to exist. How is this possible? How is it that all the archaic creatures have died, and humans are still alive? The primary, secondary, and tertiary eras of our world have passed, and we still see human beings walking on the street. This gives us more than enough authority to say to Darwin, Huxley, and Haeckel, who did so much harm to humanity with their materialistic theories, that humans existed long before the Paleolithic era. In the third lecture, I commented on the navel of the universe, on Omeacan, referring to the germ from which this planet was born. It is clear that Omeacan developed in several dimensions before the Earth could exist physically. I mean that in Omeacan, at the navel of the world, the entire planet gestated, passing through several periods of activity in different dimensions before crystallizing in its current physical form. The human being, as a seed, developed from Omeacan and gradually crystallized through various dimensions to take the physical form of the polar era. Here we are touching on matters that bother materialists. They say they only believe in what they see, and yet they believe in all their utopias. They are constantly searching for the primordial man among the subterranean layers of the Quaternary era. They invent more theories every day in which they believe without having seen them. They tell lies, they believe in what they do not see, they are deceivers. We can verify what we say. We have research methods through the technique of meditation, through which we can develop certain faculties, such as the Prajnaparamita intuition, that allow us to study the Akashic records of nature. In those records lies the entire history of the earth and its races. If the materialistic pigs leave their fanatical position and decide to enter the disciplines of Gnosis, they can develop certain faculties that will make the history of the earth and its races accessible to them. The time has come for each of us to reflect on ourselves and the universe. Human beings exist on Earth far beyond the primary era, far beyond the Paleolithic era. The fact that we continue to exist despite most animals from bygone times having disappeared for the most part gives us the right to assert that we are as ancient as the earth, as nature. Facts are facts, and we must surrender to them. If we have not perished, if we have not disappeared from the world stage through so many catastrophes, despite most creatures from the Mesozoic era having vanished, it gives us the authority to say that we are very special beings, that we existed on Earth before the creatures of the Pliocene or the Mesozoic eras appeared on the Earth's surface. This right is given to us by the fact that we exist, the concrete fact that eternities have passed, and we continue to live. Contemporary creatures have died, yet we are alive. All have perished, but we still exist. Therefore, we have a reason to laugh in the face of Huxley, Darwin, and Haeckel, figures who were lethal to humanity. The various scenarios in which humanity has unfolded deserve to be studied and considered. How marvelous and wise are the Gnawa sons! They not only contemplate the race devoured by the tigers of wisdom but also the Hyperboreans who were swept away by strong hurricanes, the Lemurians who perished from the sun, rain, fire, and great earthquakes, and the Atlanteans who perished by the waters. These Gnawa sons go very far, observing the movements of that egg yolk on the egg white, those periodic movements of the continents, which either separate or move away, causing great glaciations where all life perishes, or they create new activities. These sons of Anahuac work through the tertiary, secondary, and primary periods. Finally, they rise in the fiery changes every 52 years. We are now in the fifth of these changes, the fifth Sunday. The secret doctrine of Anahuac contains precious treasures that the enemies of Mexico, the materialist atheist anthropologists, would never accept. Glossary for the fifth lecture. Demiurge, name given by Platonic Greeks to the creative intelligence. In Plato's cosmogony, in the first part of Timaeus, the demiurge is the intelligent force or the sovereign intelligence that designs and governs the cosmos. Euclid, Greek mathematician who taught in Alexandria during the reign of Ptolemy I, 3rd century BC. He left us elements, which forms the basis of modern plane geometry. Logos, the divinity manifested in every nation and people, the effect of the unmanifest cause. Metaphysically, it means word and speech. It is the beginning and end of the universe to which it corresponds, it is its cause and object, its center and circumference, it is in all things, and all things are in it. Oligocene, this term refers to a period in the Tertiary or Neozoic era, between the Eocene and Miocene. The term Oligocene refers to the fauna and flora of the transitional time from the Eocene to the Miocene. The Pleiades, stars in the zodiacal constellation of Taurus. They are also known as the Seven Sisters and were well known to the ancients, who primarily named 6 of them. In reality, they are composed of thousands of stars. Some of the most well-known ones are Atlas, Alcyone, Merope, Electra, Seleno, Taygete, and the 2 Asterope stars. Pliocene, this term refers to a period in the Tertiary era of the Neogene system, limited below by the upper Miocene deposits corresponding to the Pontian, on which Pleistocene sediments rest. The term Pliocene refers to the more recent fauna and flora that are similar to the present. Prajnaparamita, the perfection of wisdom, one of the 6 cardinal virtues in Buddhism. Sanskrit, the ancient language of the Brahmins, which is still the sacred language of India, part of the large family of Indo-European or Aryan languages. The sacred language of India is known in 2 forms, one older and one more modern. The first was used to write the Vedas, and the second, the language in which most Sanskrit texts are written. These 2 forms are called, respectively, Vedic Sanskrit and Brahmanic or Classical Sanskrit. Sirius, the star in the constellation Canis Major, the brightest star in the sky, visible throughout the winter. From ancient times, Sirius regulated the Egyptian calendar, announcing the Nile flood because it appeared in June during those times. Homer and Hesiod celebrated the brilliance of Sirius in their writings. Spiritual sun, the hidden or invisible sun, of which the visible sun of our solar system is only a reflection or shadow, just as the latter gives life and light to the planets, the spiritual sun gives life to the spiritual and psychic realms of the entire cosmos or universe. Spiritual sun equals Paramatman. 6th lecture. Undoubtedly, terrestrial humanity has passed through various stages of development, and this is something we must analyze judiciously. There is talk of the mechanical evolution of nature, of man, and of the cosmos. From an anthropological point of view, we must understand that there are 2 types of evolution. The first would obviously begin with sexual cooperation properly understood in all its aspects. The second is different. Undoubtedly, at the beginning, the human race multiplied in the same way as cells multiply. We know that the nucleus divides in 2 within a living cell, specializing a certain amount of cytoplasm and inherent materials to form new cells. These 2 cells, in turn, divide into 2 more, and thus, through the process of cell division, organisms develop, cells multiply, and so on. At the beginning, androgynes divided into 2 or 3 individuals to reproduce. Later on, this changed, and the organism had to prepare for reproduction through sexual cooperation. Obviously, it was in Lemuria, a continent once located in the Indian Ocean, where the main aspects related to reproduction were carried out. Initially, the generative organs, the lingam yoni, were not yet fully developed. These male-female organs needed to crystallize and develop completely so that later, in time, the human species could reproduce through sexual cooperation. As these male-female organs developed, not only in androgynous humans but also in hermaphrodites, biologically and psychosomatically interesting events occurred. For example, the fertilizing cell managed to make contact with the ovule, and this cell atom detached from the father-mother's body to develop and unfold. As a result, through delicate processes, it became a new creature. The second aspect of this issue was also quite interesting. The fertilized egg, the ovule that the female sex releases from her ovaries every month, had a certain extraordinary consistency. It was an egg in itself, in its intrinsic constitution. An egg was fertilized internally within the father-mother, within the hermaphrodite, an egg that, when it emerged into the external world, could develop or incubate until it finally opened, allowing a creature to emerge from it, a creature nourished by the breasts of the father-mother, which is already quite interesting. Much later in time, it was noticed that certain creatures came into existence with one organ more developed than the other. Eventually, humanity divided into opposite sexes. When this happened, when this occurred, then sexual cooperation was needed to create and recreate. Haeckel's genealogies regarding the possible origin of man and our three primordial races do not fit within the materialist anthropology that currently dominates the world. Unfortunately, they are truly the laughingstock of materialist anthropologists, enemies of the divine. They mock, equally, both Haeckel's genealogy and genealogies, speaking in the plural. Like those lineages of Homer. You clearly remember Achilles, the illustrious warrior and son of Mars, Agamemnon, the son of Jupiter who rules from afar, and so on. These are prophetic phrases or words of that man who sang in ancient times of old Troy and Achilles, the warrior. We must be very clear in all these anthropological matters, obviously. Scientists of this era will have to choose between Paracelsus, the father of chemistry, and Haeckel's Sagira, the famous mythological Sagira. In any case, there is much that we need to analyze and investigate within the exclusively anthropological field. If we denied the division of the living cell or the primordial reproductive process, we would have to deny the reproduction of the munnerin or the atom from Haeckel's watery abyss, dividing itself to multiply. In reality, science could in no way speak scientifically against that primordial system of reproduction through cell division, or the oviparous act. However, we clearly see that these two theories, about how reproduction began, either through sexual cooperation or through the development of generative organs before possible cooperation, are highly debatable and thorny. All religious theogonies, from the Orphic, which is quite ancient, to the Christian Bible, tell of a beginning through sexual cooperation, which is more symbolic. Alchemy could repeat it, but not scientific anthropological. Because a process of evolution could not begin with sexual cooperation when the generative organs have not yet been created. There had to be a period of preparation for reproduction through cooperation, a period during which the generative organs had to develop in human physiology. Religious scriptures, both from the East and the West, have been greatly altered, except for the Vishnu Purana. For example, it says that Data, after giving humans the ability to reproduce through cooperation, declared, long before humans could have that ability, long before sexual cooperation between man and woman existed, other modes of reproduction already existed. It refers to stages before the formation of generative organs in humans. I don't go so far as to emphatically state that those systems before sexual cooperation had no connection with creative energy. I clearly think that sexual energy itself has other forms of manifestation, and before the generative organs in the human species had developed, that energy had other ways of expression to create and recreate. It's a shame that the sacred scriptures of all religions have been adulterated. We know very well that even the Edda altered the Pentateuch in the Hebrew Bible a bit. But, in any case, it's essential that we continue to analyze and reflect. Where did the different races develop? We have said many times that this notion of the noepithecoid is quite absurd, just like the cynocephalus with a tail, the tailless monkey, and the tree-dwelling man, mere utopian ideas without any basis. We have already had a good laugh about Haeckel's mythical Sagira, that kind of talking monkey, something like the missing link between man and monkey. But it is necessary to know where these races developed, in what settings these evolutions and involutions of humanity took place. That is what we really need to know, because it would be impossible to detach human races from their environment, from different continents, islands, mountains, and natural settings. It is indeed quite remarkable that, despite the enormous reptiles in the Mesozoic era, humanity still lives, while those ancient monsters have disappeared from the face of the earth. How is it possible that all those prehistoric monsters perished, and humanity continues to exist? We have placed great emphasis on this matter, and it is necessary to think about it. It is undeniable that humans are related to their environment. There were undoubtedly other forms of reproduction besides sexual cooperation. But it is important to learn about the environment where different races developed. We all need to reflect on this. During the time of Atlantis, the North and South Poles were not where they are now. At that time, the Arctic Pole was located on the equator, at the easternmost point of Africa, and the Antarctic Pole, exactly on the equator in the opposite direction, in a specific location in the Pacific. Tremendous changes have occurred in the Earth's physiognomy. The true ancient maps are unknown to the scholars of this era. In the secret crypts of the lamas in the Himalayas, there are maps of the ancient Earth, geographical charts that demonstrate that our world had a different appearance in the past. Think about Lemuria, the giant continent that was once located in the Indian Ocean. It was connected to Australia since Australia is part of Lemuria, as is all of Oceania. The Arctic was located at the easternmost point on the equator line of Africa. Everything was different, distinct. During that time, one of those terrible glaciations occurred. This glaciation projected precisely from the Arctic Pole, located in Africa, towards Arabia, or in other words, towards Southwest Asia. It also almost completely covered Lemuria. The entire area was filled with ice, but the Mediterranean did not experience this glaciation. It is interesting to note that there are times when our Earth goes through such glaciations, where ice invades certain areas, and millions of creatures perish. All of this is truly due to the Earth's axis tilt in relation to the elliptical plane. Human beings have had to evolve in different scenarios, and we must thoroughly understand these scenarios. How did America emerge? How did Europe appear? How did Lemuria sink? How did Atlantis also disappear? Lemuria was accepted by Mr. Darwin and still exists at the bottom of the Indian Ocean. Through successive lectures, we will study all these scenarios where the human race has evolved. Obviously, organisms have undergone various morphological changes in different environments. If, for example, we were to say that the intellectual animal, wrongly called man, has the famous mouse as its ancestor, as materialist anthropologists now talk about, or rather, the runco mentioned by South Americans, we would be distorting the truth. This huge mouse or runco from South America is known to have originally come from Plato's Atlantis, and long before Atlantis existed, man existed. Therefore, man is older than the famous Atlantean runco or mouse, as it is referred to these days. If we were to say that man originally descended from certain primates and later from certain hominids of the ancient Lemurian land, as accepted by Mr. Darwin, we would still be distorting the truth. Because before simians existed, long before the so-called primates or hominids appeared, man already existed. Furthermore, before species reproduction developed through cooperation, man already existed. Man is even older than the Lemuria accepted by Mr. Darwin. We must acknowledge that this human race, which has been superficially studied by materialist anthropologists and has passed through the monolithic times, the Eocene, Miocene, and Pliocene epochs, is even older than the Atlantean and Lemurian continents. It is necessary, I repeat, to continue studying the different scenarios of our world to better understand the various processes of evolution and involution of the various human races. For now, I want to say that we Gnostics are firm in our concepts, and if we were to choose between Paracelsus, the father of modern chemistry, or Haeckel, the creator of the famous mythical Sagira, we would undoubtedly choose the former, the great sage Paracelsus. 6th Lecture Glossary. Agamemnon, son of Atreus, brother of Menelaus, legendary king of Mycenae and Argos, leader of the Greek heroes who besieged Troy. Androgen, a term used by Zanger for genital products that give rise only to male individuals. Androgynous, having both sexes, hermaphroditic. Achilles, son of Thetis and Peleus, king of the Myrmidons, the most famous of the Greek heroes of the Iliad. He killed Hector in the siege of Troy but was fatally wounded in the heel by a poisoned arrow shot by Paris. Cytoplasm, synonymous with protoplasm. Dia, pity, mercy, compassion. Eddas, 2 collections, one in prose and one in verse, of ancient Scandinavian literature. Physiporus, refers to organized beings that reproduce by dividing or cleaving their own bodies. Hermaphrodite, having both sexes. The mythological basis of hermaphroditism is found in the legend of Hermaphroditus, the son of Hermes and Aphrodite, a boy of seductive beauty. While bathing in a spring near Halicarnassus one day, a nymph named Samael fell in love with him and asked the gods to merge their two bodies into one. The nymph's prayer was granted, and in memory of this fusion of the two beings, Hermaphroditus retained the organs of both sexes. Homer, Greek epic poet, generally considered the author of the epics the Iliad and the Odyssey. Laplace, Pedro Simon, Marquis, French mathematician and astronomer, 1749–1827, author of numerous studies on the movements of the Moon, Jupiter, and Saturn, inventor of the cosmological system that bears his name. Orphic refers to poetic and philosophical works related to the mythical figure of Orpheus and other legendary figures like Linus and Musaeus. Paracelsus, Theophrastus Bombast von Hohenheim, also known as Swiss alchemist and physician, 1493–1541, one of the founders of experimental medicine. Pentateuch, part of the Bible that comprises the 5 canonical books of the Old Testament, written by Moses, including Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. Protoplasm, cytoplasm, cellular plasma, the living substance of the cell, a viscous, usually colorless mass, insoluble in water, and forming the most important part of animal and plant cells. Physiologically, it is the carrier of all vital phenomena, including irritability, nutrition, assimilation, dissimilation, movement, growth, and cell division. Vishnu Purana, scripture describing the worship of Rama, one of the incarnations of Vishnu, in India. 7th lecture. Certainly, the planet Earth deserves to be studied deeply. Earth's inhabitants want to travel to other worlds, when in reality, they still don't know their own world. All over the planet, there are various events, occurrences, and phenomena completely unknown to official science. It is worth recalling some phenomena that occur to certain creatures in the oceans. Around the year 1917, a sea serpent measuring 27 meters in length was observed on the coast of Massachusetts, United States. The Boston Naturalist Society studied it thoroughly, but it was never seen in those waters again, of course. For example, a trawl ship captured a tadpole in larval state measuring 2 meters in size. If it had been allowed to develop according to naturalistic studies, it would have reached a length of 22 meters. Such creatures are truly unknown in general. How do they live? How do they behave? Where do these creatures develop? Why do they exist? Think about that famous blue fish, which was considered extinct. It has always been poetically referred to by a name that reminds us of singing, voice, and poetry. I'm referring to the coelacanth. This animal is quite strange. It has limbs very similar to those of humans and mainly lives at the bottom of the Indian Ocean. Let us not forget that Lemuria existed precisely in the Indian Ocean. This means that even now, in this day and age, that fish still exists in Lemuria itself. It lives in the depths and rarely surfaces. Undoubtedly, the deep regions of the Indian Ocean are extraordinary. It gives us much to think about the existence of an ancient creature in the 20th century. Why does it exist in the 20th century? What is the reason? Fossilized remains of such a fish were found once, and it was estimated to be 18 million years old. The coelacanth was well known 60 million years ago. The figure of the coelacanth is astonishing. It is noteworthy that it has well-developed limbs, resembling the arms, hands, or feet of a human being. It still exists and is perfectly alive. An ancient creature existing in the 20th century? What could materialist anthropologists say about such a creature? What would be their concept? All of this invites us to deep reflection. What will we really say about the Monosaurus or Ichthyosaurus from ancient times? It still exists in the terrible depths of the Pacific. What do the men of science know about this? Absolutely nothing. So, indeed, it is advisable for us to continue exploring all these questions to form a clear and precise understanding. Eels, for example, are quite interesting. We know that some eels from Europe and America meet in the Sargasso Sea to reproduce, but the interesting thing is that the parents never return to their original starting point. It is the offspring who return. Why does this happen? Why do the parents not return but the offspring do? How could materialist anthropologists explain this? What do they know about it? I am sure they are completely ignorant of these issues. Let's move on to the matter of tuna, which is something that deserves reflection. Tuna that comes from Brazil heads towards Scotland, then moves closer to Europe and passes near the Mediterranean. But rare is the tuna that enters the Mediterranean. What could the scientists say about all this? Why don't the migratory currents of tuna enter the Mediterranean? Who directs them? Why do they do it? At what point in their lives have the lords of materialistic anthropology defined these issues? If they claim to possess the wisdom of the universe, why have they never spoken about these matters? In truth, these materialistic people not only ignore, but, even worse, they don't realize that they don't know, and that is very serious. There are giant squids, enormous monsters with huge tentacles, about which materialist science has never said anything. Traces of these tentacles have been found in whales. Undoubtedly, all of this indicates great battles in the abyssal regions. There are also lizardfish of unknown origin about which materialist anthropology has never spoken in their lives. Continuing forward, we will also discuss certain phenomena that are unknown to the materialist gentleman. We know that there are rivers in the very sea, hundreds of meters deep, flowing in opposite directions. Why do they do that? Why does a river next to another flow in the opposite direction in the same ocean? These rivers, as we well know, flow from the north from left to right, like the hands of a clock when viewed from the front. The ones in the south do the opposite. But why doesn't the Benguela current turn? What's going on? What explanation would materialist science give for this? Why do these foolish scientists remain silent? What can they tell us about all this? Off the coast of Peru, at a depth of 1,500 meters, well-crafted and well-carved columns of Atlantean buildings have been observed, and excellent photographs of them have been obtained. The existence of Atlantis is thus demonstrated. But the foolish scientists continue, as always, to deny. There are vanished civilizations, like that of Easter Island, where gigantic effigies, huge human heads carved by the hands of giants, still exist today. Materialist science has never said a word about it. It remains silent, silent, silent. What will I say about Antarctica? There is no doubt that before the revolution of the Earth's axis, there were powerful civilizations in the North and South Poles. Undoubtedly, in the ice of Antarctica, there must be remnants of these ancient cultures. One day, archaeologists' shovels will be able to unearth them. Meanwhile, materialist science remains silent, as always, without giving explanations. There are also giant, monstrous waves in calm and serene seas, isolated waves that have no clear reason. I'm referring to Seiche waves. What is their origin? Some submarine earthquake? How could the materialist scientists explain this? What would they say about this? In reality, they not only ignore but are also ignorant of their ignorance. It's accepted that there are waves in rough seas. But in a calm sea, for an extraordinary, isolated, solitary, gigantic, and monstrous wave to appear without a known reason, is something that has never had a scientific explanation. Nevertheless, these events occur in the ocean, and materialist science has never been able to explain them. In the Atlantic Ocean, surrounding the underwater ridge where the great continent of Atlantis once existed, there are about 100,000 earthquakes annually. This is interesting because terrible earthquakes and large tsunamis ended Atlantis. But even now, at this time, submerged Atlantis still trembles. We should reflect on all these matters, as they are quite interesting. Undoubtedly, the planet Earth is not known to materialist anthropologists. In truth, this Earth continues to be a genuine enigma for materialistic science. Some spiny lobsters gather in sufficient numbers to form a migration and descend on the continental shelf, slowly walking toward the abyssal plain in an unknown direction. What would the scientists say about this? What explanation do they provide? Where are these creatures headed? What is their exact goal? Why do they undertake this kind of migration? Enigmas that are not understood by materialistic scientists. Our planet Earth has not always been as it is now, its geological appearance has changed several times. If we examine Elliott Scott's 4 maps, we will see that Earth was completely different 1 million years ago. These 4 geographical maps deserve to be considered. They resemble 4 maps that exist and are still found in some underground crypts in Central Asia. Such maps are unknown to the know-it-alls of materialistic science. They are kept secretly to preserve them intact because we know very well that the lords of false science are always ready to alter everything to justify their so-called theories. The first of Elliott Scott's maps is very striking and extremely interesting. It shows what the world was like about 800,000 years before Christ. At that time, the region of the brachycephalics of the much-touted ultramodern anthropology did not exist. From the Bering Strait, passing through Siberia and Europe to France and Germany, there was nothing but water. Siberia and Europe had not yet properly emerged from the depths of the oceans. Africa had only its eastern part, as the western and southern parts of that continent were submerged beneath the raging waves of the ocean. The small continent that existed in East Africa was known as Grabon Sea. South America was submerged in the ocean's waters, not yet in existence. The United States, Canada, Alaska, all of that was submerged beneath the ocean, and yet, Mexico existed. It seems incredible that 800,000 years before Christ, Mexico already existed. When Europe didn't exist yet, Mexico existed. When South America hadn't emerged from the depths of the ocean, Mexico existed. This invites us to understand that within the depths of this sacred land of Mexico, as ancient as the world itself, there exist extraordinary archaeological and esoteric treasures that have not yet been discovered by the archaeologist's shovel. Lemuria was, at that time, a gigantic continent that stretched across the Pacific, covering the entire area of Australia, Oceania, the Indian Ocean, so vast, and projected all the way across the Pacific to those places where South America later emerged. See for yourselves how gigantic Lemuria was, how enormous. The face of the earth was completely different some 800,000 years before Jesus the Christ. The capital of Atlantis was Toyon, the city of the 7 solid gold gates. Materialist anthropologists will say, those who cannot see beyond their noses, what basis do we have to speak about the great capital? I want to tell those gentlemen who have done so much to take away humanity's eternal values and lead it down the path of involution that we have precise data to talk about Lemuria, that there are maps kept in great secrecy in some underground crypts that indicate where Toyon, the capital of Atlantis, was located. So, when we speak, we do so with full knowledge. If we mention Lemuria and Atlantis, it is because they were continents that truly existed. We are well aware that even Darwin himself accepted the existence of Lemuria. Toyon was located in a corner, in the southwest of that great country, facing the southeastern or southwestern coast of a land strip that clearly extended to the Loire, the Mediterranean, eastern Africa, and finally reached the south of Asia, which already existed. Atlantis itself projected from Brazil to the Azores, that is completely confirmed, and from Nova Scotia, directly across the entire Atlantic Ocean. So, in reality, Atlantis covered the entire ocean that bears its name. It was a great country. Just imagine for a moment Atlantis projecting to the Azores, to Nova Scotia, and descending to what is now Brazil. What an enormous continent it was! It extended from south to north, it was magnificent. It sank through incessant earthquakes. Several catastrophes were necessary for Atlantis to disappear completely. So, in reality, the stage of the world has been changing, the appearance of this terrestrial globe has not always been the same, and different human races have developed in it. But before anything else, it is urgent to review the various geological changes that the Earth has gone through. We understand that each race has had a stage, that we need to know the environment, the climate, the conditions in which it had to live, and this is indispensable. We really need to carefully study the appearance of the world in ancient times, the various geological changes that the Earth has gone through. Only then can we form a clear, precise concept of the origin of man, of his various cultures, of his different evolutionary and involutionary processes. But if, unfortunately, we were completely trapped in all contemporary prejudices, we would not really be able to know anything about geology, much less about the processes of evolution and development of the human race. It is necessary to inquire, investigate, analyze a bit. There are many enigmas on the face of the earth that are unknown to official science. How is it possible that the Ichthyosaurus or Monosaurus, which belonged to times like the Pliocene, still exists in the 20th century in the depths of the Pacific Ocean? These are mysteries that even materialistic science has not been able to decipher or understand until now. Through these discussions, we have to get to know the various stages of the world. We will have to shed light on the darkness. Once we have laid the scientific foundations of Gnostic anthropology, then we will review the ancient cultures. It is essential to know how the Pelasgians emerged in Europe. It is necessary to know the ancient cultures. It is urgent to know something about the civilization of the Hyperboreans, and so on. When it is said that the cultures of America came through the Bering Strait from the Asian continent, a terrible falsehood is being asserted because ancient maps show that the Bering Strait, Siberia, Canada, and the United States did not exist. 800,000 years ago, Mexico had a solemn, marvelous population, separated from the Bering Strait by vast oceans. So, materialistic science is talking about what it has not seen, what it has no evidence of. We are talking based on maps like those of Elliot Scott and others that are found in underground crypts in the Himalayan mountains, in Central Asia. Those who claim that the human race came to America through the Bering Strait are demonstrating great ignorance, a complete lack of knowledge of ancient geographical charts. With such assertions, materialistic anthropologists are deceiving public opinion and abusing the intelligence of readers. We, I repeat, are lovers of scientific research, of precise analysis. We do not allow ourselves the luxury of accepting materialistic theories. We are not fools who will be fooled by assumptions based on false utopianism. Additional glossary. SCM, acronym that stands for According to Materialistic Science. Abyssal, of great underwater depth. Comparative anatomy, comparative study of the form and structure of beings in different taxonomic groups, such as protists, animals, and plants, to identify similarities and differences. Amphioxus, primitive vertebrate. Anthropoids, among animals, those most closely related to humans, gibbons, orangutans, chimpanzees, and gorillas. Australopithecus, group of fossil primates found in the southeastern region of Africa. Although still displaying characteristics of anthropoid apes, they show many human-like features, jaw structure, teeth, upright posture, bipedal walking, and more. SCM. Brachycephalic, from Greek brachus, short, and kephal, head, describes individuals with nearly round skulls. Cambrian, geological period that lasted approximately from 500 million to 420 million years ago. SCM. Cynocephalo, from Greek kuon, dog, and kephal, head, a type of large African monkey whose head resembles that of dogs. The Egyptians worshipped the cynocephalus. Cretaceous, geological period that lasted approximately from 140 million to 70 million years ago. SCM. Quaternary, the most recent division of Earth's history, including several geological periods, extending from the Pleistocene, approximately 1 million years ago, to the present day. SCM. Phylogenetic development, changes that have occurred during the evolutionary history of a taxonomic group, species, genus, family, etc. SCM. Ontogenetic development, changes that occur during the developmental history of an individual organism, from fertilization of the egg to the death of the individual. SCM. Devonian, geological period that lasted approximately from 310 million to 270 million years ago. SCM. Fossil, mineralized remains of an organism or direct evidence of its presence, such as footprints. It also applies to soft parts partially or wholly preserved by freezing, e.g., mammoths found in Siberia. Genealogy, series of ancestors of each individual. Geneanthropy, study of the origin of man, how each generation is engendered. Glaciations, intensified glacial activity during certain periods of Earth's history, resulting in the widespread invasion of glacial ice. Ethnic groups, racial groups. Continental shelf, submerged part of the continent in the sea, with a gentle slope, extending to a depth of 200 meters, representing the underwater extension of the continent itself. SCM. Pleistocene, geological period that lasted approximately from 1 million years ago to 10,000 years ago. 4 glaciations occurred during this period. SCM. Pliocene, geological period, part of the Tertiary era, that lasted approximately from 15 million years to 1 million years ago. SCM. Precambrian, geological period prior to the Cambrian. It is believed to have lasted from the Earth's formation until about 500 million years ago. SCM. Permian, geological period that lasted approximately from 220 million to 190 million years ago. SCM. Continental platform, the stable part of the continent that is not subjected to deformation or mountain building processes. Jurassic, geological period that lasted approximately from 170 million to 140 million years ago. SCM. Language agglutinating, those in which roots, the unchanging part of a word while the determination changes, am is the root of amar, and affixes, particles added to the beginning and end of words to modify their meaning, are juxtaposed to form a word. Most languages are agglutinating. Radical languages, where all words are roots and are placed side by side. Ontogenesis, from Greek ontos, being, and genesis, generation. Series of transformations undergone by an individual from the moment of fertilization of the egg to the perfect being. Paleocene, geological period, part of the Tertiary era, that lasted approximately from 70 million years to 60 million years ago. SCM. Outside of us, anger, greed, lust, envy, pride, sloth, gluttony. Away from us the thorn that wounds the flesh. Away from us the tares of murmuring and even slander. Away from us the loathsome venom of envy. Away from us the monster of lust. We want missionaries who, with the slow and gentle steps of the great Hellenes, go from door to door preaching the word. That is the kind of missionaries we want. In no way do we want to turn Gnosis into a business. Out with finances in universal Gnosticism, we only want one thing, to deeply love all of humanity. Inverted peace.